What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Hopefully, everyone is having a great morning thus far. But goodness gracious, we've got a lot to cover because Bill Simmons, actually one of my favorite all-time sports personalities, a guy who is a mutual Red Sox fan and someone who I've read for a long time. Used to be at ESPN, then he created his own website. Has actually on a second one now called The Ringer after Grantland.com. There were a lot of tremendous pieces of work done at Grantland. A lot of good, especially podcasts, have been done at The Ringer thus far. So I do enjoy his content, even though I don't necessarily think he's as astute on a sports commentator as he used to be, and certainly not. He does barely writes anymore at all. So, it's basically all other media. But I really did used to love his writing. It's one of those things where you really appreciate someone who can both be analytical and funny while doing commentary in writing. It's one of those skills that most people don't necessarily have. So I always respected Bill for that. So, and I think that he actually did, I've heard he did some good things with this power poll. So we're going to see what he has to say, and we can see if we can add a couple things, see where he's right, see where he's wrong, and see where their differentiation lies.
Expirings, and for some teams, 20 for other teams. We're going to do the quarter awards in the form of a power poll. If you remember from when I wrote on ESPN.com and on Grantland, I used to do power polls for the NBA and the NFL. I used to split them up in little tiers.
He used to write
jokes, all that stuff. I'm going to do a modified version of that right now. I'm going to go backwards by tiers from 30 to 1. This is going to work. You're going to enjoy it. I swear to God.
If not,
money back. Even though this podcast is free, I will give you your money back. First tier. This takes us from teams 30 to 26. Wildling for Wemby. Excuse my voice. I've been sick for like 5 weeks. This might be my last podcast. I might die. So my voice is going to be a little wobbly, but it's fine.
Okay.
Wobbling for Wemby. 30 San Antonio, 29 Charlotte, 28 Detroit, 27 Houston, 26 Orlando. I think those 5 teams, whether they've wanted to admit it or not, are throwing their hats into the Wemby ring. San Antonio's terrible. They don't really have a choice. They're going to get worse. They'll trade Pirtle. They'll make some moves. They're going to be in the mix.
Yeah, Pirtle's injured right now. And it's really unfortunate for San Antonio because their roster is it has 3 players who have, I think, really good value. I've always liked Keldon Johnson. He started off the season super hot, and he's been a little bit less efficient recently. Actually, a lot less efficient, to be honest. He's had some really 5 for 22 clunkers. But I really like Devin Vassell. I think that guy could absolutely be a top 2 or 3 player on a team that can win multiple playoff rounds in the future. I think that guy has the ability, if coached correctly, and I think he will be and has been. I think that guy could really be a cornerstone player for their franchise, which is great. But the rest of their roster, I mean, it is down to the studs. Bill is absolutely correct. They're going to trade Pirtle because he has a lot of value for a team like Denver, who might need a bit more size to help Jokic protect the rim. Pirtle's actually, I think, supremely underrated. Really efficient, great rim protector. He's actually not bad at all as a big man in space. He's genuinely better than Rudy Gobert in space. So as much as he's still a big man and he's not the most mobile guy, he does quite well in space covering pick and roll. He understands the sort of the dynamics. He's been very well coached and he's smart to begin with. He understands the dynamics of where to be in different coverages, understands when to rotate, when not to. And he'd be super valuable for a ton of teams. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of demand for him in San Antonio. I'm sure understands the value that they can recoup by trading him this year. I think this is the year they trade him for sure.
What you want to be in that top 4 because you have the same percentages for top 4, basically. One thing about this tier, though, the league is really deep. And I noticed that I've been working on a trade value list for The Ringer, which I think is going to run in the next couple weeks. And I think I'm going to have 70 guys in the trade value list.
It's a lot.
And if you just look at Charlotte, Detroit, Houston, Orlando, LaMelo, Cade, Ivy, Jalen Green, Jabari, Paolo, Franz, all 8 are in my top 55. So even though it looks bleak, you're in the bottom 5. The best record out of all these teams is 6-15 for Charlotte and San Antonio. But at least they have talent at building blocks, so it could be worse. The next category.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I actually am someone who really believes in a lot of the Orlando guys. a little bit more than most people do. Like, I think it's interesting. Like, Zach Lowe is another guy who I respect a lot in terms of his perspective on NBA players, NBA talent, etc. And he was writing the other day about the Magic, and he called Markelle Fultz's jumper still wonky. I fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think Markelle has any problem shooting from the mid-range. He hasn't attempted many threes this year, but I think that he has genuinely gotten himself into the position where you can reliably say he can make a jump shot from the mid-range. And he's so smart. He's such a brilliant, he does all of the little Chris Paul style point guard things. And I mean that in a very complimentary way. He has so many little ways that he shoulder fakes, head fakes, these types of things that open up a little bit more of an angle to make a better pass so that someone's more available on the inside, so that a cut is available if his teammate wants to make it. He is so brilliant at the little things that come with playing with the point guard position. Handling the ball, creating for others. He's just a really brilliant player. And I really hope that he can stay healthy for 50, 60 games this year, because I think that he's a guy who's going to show out and he's going to remove that bust label really for good. I just think he has so much value that he can bring to the table, especially for a young team that's developing like Orlando. I love Wendell Carter. I think he is an absolute demon on offense and defense. Again, I mean that wholeheartedly complimentary. But I just, they have a lot of young pieces. Just those two guys, though, stick out as guys who absolutely can make the leap in the next year and a half to being sort of fringe all-star players. And if the Magic get that, they're going to be totally fine. I think they're going to be totally fine. I like where their rebuild is at, personally, especially compared to a place like Houston that's not well coached. We'll get to them in a bit. But yeah, no, it's just, I have no problem with Orlando. I think Orlando actually is going to be a team whose record improves drastically if Markelle can stay healthy, especially, and they get a lot of their guards back, because they've had horrific injuries thus far this year. For a team that's relatively young and has a lot of guards on it, the number of guards that have been just like decimated is crazy. And Bol Bol is something. This is the first time that Bol Bol has ever had a consistent offensive opportunity, a consistent stretch of playing time where he's been healthy. I've loved what I've seen from him. Tremendous production in spurts. And so, the raw talent and the ability on Orlando, I think, is really, really heartening for Orlando Magic fans who have been long suffering for sure. But I like that a lot. Charlotte, unfortunately, obviously without LaMelo, that team really might be the worst team in the league. Obviously, it gives guys like Terry Rozier and Kelly Oubre the ability to shoot whenever the hell they want, which is going to lead to a lot of inefficiency. But as much as I like Rozier, I do not like Kelly Oubre. I think that he's a chucker, an unrepentant chucker, and I think it was just a great litmus test of whether or not he's a winning player. Just didn't fit it in Golden State, didn't do the little things, wasn't consistent defensively, the effort and the attention to detail, which is what Golden State and their coaching staff demand, just wasn't there. He's just not that type of guy. And he's not a winning player for me. If he's a guy who you can stick on your bench, your sixth or seventh guy, who's your microwave, who you use and never really rely upon, great. But it's very unlikely that he'll ever be that on a team that has a chance to win a championship, because most of them can't really afford that level of depth. So
category is to tank or not to tank. There's three teams. Number 25, OKC, they're 8-13. Number 24, Chicago, they're 9-11. How about
Chicago?
9-11, even though they traded Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter, and this year's top 4 protected first for Vucevic, and they're the 7th worst team in the league. That trade, obviously, as much as Vooch, I think Vooch has been totally fine. He actually had a really nice game in Golden State last night. When he's a guy who has the ability, the offensive skill set to really exploit a mismatch effectively. I like Vooch a lot. I always have, but he's an absolute black hole defensively. Not a guy who you want on the court. Defensively, he tries his best, but his raw skills defensively are just not very good. Easily exploitable, a little bit plotting. So not a guy who you really trust. And so unfortunately, Chicago, they need to be the best version of themselves in order to compete. And unfortunately, the best version of themselves, which we saw at the beginning of last year, which is why it's genuinely really upsetting. I'm sure it is as a Chicago fan. When you look at the way that they started the year last year, a lot of people are like, oh, that was a mirage. In my opinion, it was not at all. I loved the construction of that roster with guys like Caruso and Lonzo Ball, especially. Lonzo Ball
just as a quick tangent for a second, Lonzo is one of the genuinely sad stories in the NBA because Lonzo was a guy who came into the league. His jump shot was broken. What happened? He said, I understand my jump shot is broken. I am going to bust my ass on a consistent basis for a long period of time, especially in the offseason, to make myself a completely reliable catch and shoot guy. And he did it. Just a guy who was reliably 40% plus, shooting open three-pointers especially, and a really competitive, intelligent player on both ends of the court, great distributor, can handle the ball, but doesn't need to have the ball. He's a point guard type skill set who doesn't need to have the ball. That's incredibly valuable. A great glue guy, but to say he's a glue guy does him a disservice. Like Caruso's a glue guy, a guy who's a brilliant defender and whatever. Absolutely unbelievable last night, by the way, against Curry. Curry on track to be an MVP frontrunner. He and Tatum, I think, right now are the two guys who are heading the list alongside Luka as the MVP frontrunners. And Curry wasn't shut down. No one can ever fully shut him down. But Caruso made his life extraordinarily difficult. I think he shot 6 of 16. I think it was his worst, certainly his most ineffective stop and start game of the season. And that is Caruso in a nutshell. Curry, I think, turned it over 6 times. You know, a lot of travels, a lot of indecision. And that's where you see the absolute best defenders coming to the fore, and making their imprint. When they make generational offensive players, which Curry absolutely is, a bit hesitant. And Caruso can do that. He would help, I would say, literally every playoff team. Just an unbelievable player. And so having those two guys, Caruso and Lonzo, plus really good offensive talent, LaVine, unfortunately, last year he came out absolutely on fire. You know, he had that Team USA bump where actually Draymond and his leadership helped a lot. Apparently they had a lot of conversations over bottles of wine. And LaVine came out with his absolute alpha dog personality. He was shooting the ball lights out. He was unbelievable. He was using his athleticism to his advantage. And he hasn't been the same guy since he injured his knee. Right? He had knee injury in the offseason. That worries me a lot. It genuinely does. He's making like $37 million a year. That's a guy who you really hope gets healthy. He says he's had stretches where he's felt like himself this season and stretches where he hasn't. But the problem is when you're paying a guy $37 million a year, you need him to feel like himself all the time. You can't have him hamstrung by injuries. So that worries me a lot for Chicago. I don't know whether they can get anyone to take his contract, but let's see what Bill says about it.
That's rough. And then I have the Knicks at 10 or 11. They're 23. The Knicks aren't bad, but that goes back to how deep the league is right now. The Knicks, I have as the 8th worst team in the league, and they're 10 and 11, and they're, you know, one move away from one star from being kind of interesting. So here's my answers for to tank or not to tank. OKC, yes.
Absolutely.
How do we do it? Well, I think SGA, get him to the All-Star game. Maybe he can even be a starter. He's averaging 30 a game. And then I think he comes up with some sort of heel injury. And you just, or maybe you just take him for a ride.
It's pretty incredible. Okay, so here's the SGA problem. He's a guy who actually grew up really close to me. I'm from Montreal, and the Toronto guy is SGA. At a certain point, when you're a guy who, and I'm one of the highest on SGA you could possibly imagine. SGA is absolutely unbelievable as a player. And the question becomes, at what point do you look at SGA and you say, okay, this guy is an absolute, at least third team all NBA level talent. We're asking him every night to be like, okay, Shea, in order for us to be in the game in the fourth quarter tonight, we're going to need you to get 30 plus, and not just 30 plus. We're going to need you to get an efficient 30 plus, get steals, do what you do best, and then maybe we'll be in the game. Shea had a little bit of a slow start last year. Let's look at his game log. I remember at the end of the year last year, he had one of the best months I can remember individually by a young player. Like, look at this month. This month is absolutely disgusting. Just like 52% from the floor, almost 40% from 3-on-4 threes a game, 29, 83% from the line. And look at the results. If you're a young player, I understand he signed an extension. That was his decision, totally fine. He's being compensated well. He's making around $30 million a year. But number one, I think he's underpaid. And number two, if you take this game out, this is an absolute unmitigated tour de force, an unbelievable show. And like, he's backpacking this team and they're not even competitive most of the time. At a certain point, this is a guy who's an absolute superstar, in my opinion. And look at how he started the year this year. You know, it's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Shooting 34%, hasn't taken as many threes this year, but getting to the line 9.3 times a game, that is the sign of a budding superstar to me. This guy, if he plays the full season, I would be crazy to deny him at least third team All-NBA. And so you're looking at this, you're like, okay, this guy's 24 years old. At what point do you go to the organization and say, dude, can I get some help here, or can you trade me? Because it's like, if this, I mean, these are the most competitive athletes on the planet. At a certain point, you have to look at your team and you're like, this team is still 2 years away minimum. You know, I like Jalen Williams a lot. I like a lot of their young guys, but they're so far away from competing. You know, they drafted a project this year. I understand that he's out for the whole year, but it's just got to be extraordinarily frustrating for this young dude. And I don't know where the tipping point is, but every year it's been like, okay, Shea, like, you know, halfway through the year, we're either going to have you take a break and maybe come back at the end, or we're going to, you know, sit you, as Bill said, to a phantom injury. It's like, at what point do we just say enough is enough? Get me on a team where I have a chance at sniffing the playoffs, you know? Because it's got to wear on a guy. It would wear on me, I'll tell you that much. And I'm nowhere near the athlete he is.
And he just doesn't come back for 2 months. Chicago should tank. And they should go deeper than that. They should blow it up. Copyright Kevin O'Connor.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I have three trades right now that save Chicago.
Let's see what he says. We're going to have a disagreement here, though.
Sweepstakes. Give them a do-over, and they're ready to go. Trade number 1. DeRozan and Vucevic to the Lakers for Russ and those 2 firsts. And make the 27 protected, make the 29 top 5 protected. If you're the Lakers, if you're going to keep Davis, which I think is insane, but it seems like they're going to. If you're going to have LeBron's already putting out all these feelers for it.
By the way, okay, good time to talk about Anthony Davis. It is amazing and great to see overall. It's brilliant to see. Anthony Davis, and Charles Barkley was saying this earlier this year, and he was dead right. The reality is he was dead right. That guy used to be 3-4 years ago a guy who you looked at and you said, this guy is going to be the face of the league, or one of the faces of the league for the next 5, 10, maybe 12 years, because he has every element that you want from an absolute superstar. He is one of the most, if not the most, disruptive NBA big men. He's amazing when he's engaged. He can rebound the ball, block shots. He can shoot the ball, though he's never been a sublime three-point shooter. He shot the ball, 33%, somewhere around there, enough to be a threat. He was great at posting up. He had every tool in the toolbox you could possibly want, and a great athlete. And then, had some injuries. Street Clothes is a hilarious nickname. And then also, last year, I don't know whose idea this was, but certainly Davis, deserves some criticism for having accepted it. The reality is someone told him, I don't know who it was, Anthony, you need to come in a lot heavier. You need to be able to play center. I presume that was the logic behind it. You need to be able to play center defensively, bang with larger bodies, as Charles says. The guy banging you. It's like, it's really extraordinarily difficult, because you understand what they wanted from him as a more physical player. But at the same time, if the advice is, okay, you're going to do something that's going to limit your activity on defense, your ability to have that second jump, your ability to rebound consistently, it's like, okay, this is against your natural biomechanics, and it's going to limit some of your best skill sets that make you who you are. This is terrible advice, and it played out horribly. Like, I've talked to a couple of people who, I'm not someone who understands biomechanics well, but they looked at what he looked like last year at the beginning of the year especially, and they're like, he's too heavy. That guy is carrying too much weight, and he got injured, unsurprisingly. And so this year, he is back in full force. So now the Lakers are faced with this dichotomy, right? On the one hand, if they want to get max value, they could trade him, because again, there's always that injury risk. You sit there looking around, okay, is it tomorrow that he's going to sprain his ankle and be out for 27 games? He's nicknamed Street Clothes for a reason. So if you want to be competitive, if you want to get LeBron the closest that you can get him to winning a playoff series potentially, you get him other pieces and you keep Davis. So the other option is, of course, you blow it up. LeBron signed on, I assuming that you're not going to do that. So we'll see what the Lakers do, but it is incredible how quickly an NBA player, especially one of Davis's talent level, can rebuild his value, because that guy is in the running for defensive player of the year. I would argue at this point, he and Draymond are the front runners for defensive player of the year. Both of them came back in incredible shape this year and are busting their asses. And the activity of both of them, unbelievable. So it's going to be an interesting decision to see what the Lakers do in the long run.
Yeah, you don't want to waste a great year for me. And the West is wide open. So you can talk yourself into it. What happens to Pelinka if the trade doesn't work? He gets fired. He's going to get fired anyway.
He should.
DeRozan and Vooch to the
I don't know if he will.
And 2 firsts, 1 lightly protected. Then trade Levine to the Knicks. Levine's coming off, the knee injury in May. He hasn't looked the same. But if you're the Knicks, you're like, well, we would have signed Levine for the max in the summer, so we'll get him anyway.
That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. I'll say it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're now, I'll never put it past James Dolan to do something really stupid. That is his job description, really, as the owner of the Knicks. But if you look at Zach LaVine, he's making like $37 million a year this year. Putting any sort of asset towards him at this point is very sus. You don't necessarily want to, if you're committing to that guy, given the fact that he doesn't even, again, to use his own quote, he doesn't feel like himself all the time, that his knee gives him problems still for extended stretches. You need to see him be absolutely healthy for at least 25 games in a row before you commit that kind of money to a guy like that, who also, he's a high jumper on his three-point shot. He is a guy who does rely a lot on his athleticism to come anywhere close to matching the value that you would need from a player you're paying $37 million a year to. And that, again, that long-term contract escalates in the coming years, goes over $40 million. So in order to do that, you absolutely have to ensure that he's healthy. I would not do that right now.
So do Toppin and expirings, and maybe take them back the Fournier trade, and maybe do like a top 4 protected first next year, something like that. And Zach LaVine, and roll the dice that his knee will be fine.
And the thing is, like, he says roll that, and it would be a huge roll of the dice. That's the correct term to use here. The problem is, does an absolutely healthy Zach LaVine make you as the Knicks a title contender in the East? Absolutely not, in my opinion. Absolutely not. You have RJ, who, again, we got to talk about RJ as well. RJ is a guy who, speaking of Canadian content, that guy is someone who he takes like 16 plus shots a game. And there was an interesting stat recently. His first 2 seasons, or his last 2 seasons, 51.1% true shooting percentage the first year. Last year, 51.1% true shooting. This year, lower than that. The number of shots that RJ Barrett takes, especially outside shots, as a part of that Knicks offense, even with Jalen Brunson this year, if you're going to be that inefficient, at a certain point, there needs to be someone who says, okay, this guy using this many of our possessions this inefficiently, someone has to look at, like, at a certain point, we need to take away this guy's green light. Right? Because he's capping us offensively. These shots need to go to somebody else, need to go somewhere else, perhaps not Julius Randle, although Julius had some nice games this year. Because RJ, he looks like he's still at least a year away, and his extension hasn't even kicked in yet. Until he proves himself over a long period of time capable of making these shots that he's taking on a consistent basis, you can't just let him take this many shots this inefficiently. You're not going to make the play. You might not even make the play-in if you're the Knicks. So that contract, they committed to him, right? In the trade discussions, they were like, okay, we are now at a crossroads. Do we want to trade RJ to get Donovan Mitchell? And they were humming and hawing. They eventually gave RJ the contract. And I think that they thought they had more flexibility because they were the only team in the sweepstakes going for Donovan at the time. They were wrong, right? Trader Danny came out of nowhere and swooped in and made another tremendous trade as they've done. Good trade for Utah, good trade for the Cavs, who have been really good this year. And Donovan, they obviously made the bet, the Cavs did, that Donovan wasn't trying on defense, which was the correct answer. He was horrific on defense last year, especially in the playoffs, in the first round. He's just getting busted off the dribble all the time. But this was a guy who came into the league from Louisville as someone who had a tremendous defensive reputation. He's really long. He has the arm span of the wingspan of a condor. He is really gifted defensively. So it was really, at the end of the day in Utah, he wasn't trying. He was not engaged on defense, which is, not good to see, but at the same time, a good piece of recognition from the Cleveland front office that this was an effort thing, an engagement thing, not a decline of defensive skills thing. And he's shown that this year. He's been brilliant on defense by comparison, especially.
And then the last piece, Caruso, if Chicago tanks, is the most interesting trade piece. His contract is really good. I think it's $9 million. He's somebody that makes sense on the Bucks. He's somebody that makes sense on the Warriors.
It's someone that makes sense on any team, really. As a Warriors piece, he would just replace DiVincenzo, really, who came into the year, had a bit of an injury problem, and just hasn't. He's come into his own a little bit more in the last couple of games as a part of that second unit. But really, what Caruso would do for the Warriors, for example, and really for any playoff team, is at minimum, because he's not an offensive player really, but at minimum, he's a very intelligent player, and you saw it from how he guarded Curry last night in the Chicago Warriors game. That dude can come in and guard a borderline top 10 player of all time, one of the best offensive players to ever pick up a basketball, and he can make him a bit hesitant, right? He can make that guy hesitate a little bit and certainly be way less efficient than he would against 97, 98% of the league, which is a tremendous piece to have, especially in certain matchups that you might encounter in the playoffs. And the Warriors actually were the beneficiary of that last year. Gary Payton II, again, a guy with great hands. They have that in common. They were able to throw him in as a wrench, and immediately he would pick up full court, and the other team's offense would be at least a little bit worse. The opposing point guard would be under much more pressure. It would just make their offense that much less fluid, that much less easy to execute. And that's a huge benefit, especially if you need to change the flow of the game. And the Warriors used that really, really well last year. And they miss him this year. They really do. Gary Payton II, I'm sure they don't begrudge him going somewhere else for money. He hasn't played at all in Portland. But that guy was a huge part of their championship run, which is why you saw, especially another reason, he absolutely busted his ass in the G League to try to get to the NBA and make a mark, and it was hard work paid off. But you saw people get really upset after he was injured by Dylan Brooks on that head swipe from behind. It was great to see him come back and be healthy in the finals.
He's somebody that makes sense in the Cavaliers. Could Okoro be enough to get, they don't have any picks left. Could Okoro and something else be enough to get Caruso? Probably not, because I have Golden State stepping in here. Golden State, Moody, DiVincenzo, and some sort of future pick swap in 2027. Give him $3 billion too, because Reinsdorf has been a cheap owner his whole life. And you get Caruso on the Warriors. That's somebody who could play crunch time for them. Watch out for that.
Without a doubt. And again, in certain matchups in the playoffs, you can throw him, for instance, you could throw him on Ja Morant. And Ja obviously wasn't healthy the entire series that they played against the Warriors last year. But you can throw Caruso on Ja Morant, and all of a sudden, is Ja going to be not a factor? Of course not. Ja is a superstar, a legitimate superstar player who runs pick and roll brilliantly, especially with Steven Adams when they can keep Steven Adams on the floor. But, that guy is immediately less effective, without a doubt, with a guy like Caruso on him. And DiVincenzo just is not that level of defender.
So anyway, you get all that stuff, you get all those picks, and you're in the Wembanyama sweepstakes. They should be doing this. Just, Kyle, put that on the TikTok. I hope you turn the TikTok camera on, because they should be doing that. All right, next.
Okay, so Bill could be right from one angle. Here's why I think he's wrong at this particular point. And again, he is projecting into the future, to be completely fair. But if you look at Chicago, the version of Chicago that we saw last year at the beginning of the year, again, to me, that was not a mirage. That was not something that you look at and say, that isn't replicable if everybody's healthy. They missed Lonzo so much last year. They missed Patrick Williams, who again is a stout defender. He's not there yet offensively, but he's developing. They missed Caruso. All these guys were injured last year, and they missed them dearly. I would want, if I'm the Chicago front office, I would not at all want to blow it up until I at least saw all of those guys healthy for a bit. Levine looking like himself again. Maybe it won't happen, but I would at least want to give it an extended stretch. And Lonzo is apparently no closer to being able to play. He's not even cutting aggressively on his knee yet, which is really tragic. Again, he's such a winning player. He is the definition of a winning player to me. And it's the fact that he can't be on the court is really frustrating. I'm sure for Chicago fans, it's extraordinarily frustrating. But I would wait at least a little bit to see if they can get another look at that team closer to full strength, because that they had something there. That was not nothing, as simplistic as a thing that is to say.
Next category, dead man walking.
If Lonzo doesn't come back, at a certain point, you do need to recoup some assets if it's never really going to be a healthy thing. And if you can get whatever you can get for Zach LaVine, if someone's willing to overpay for Zach LaVine, I have no problem with that. I just don't think it's going to happen.
The Los Angeles Lakers, they're 7-12. They lost a game last night because LeBron fell asleep and forgot to guard.
The Indiana game was hilarious.
Who hit a 3 at the buzzer. They have an impossible December schedule coming up. And if I were them, right now I'd trade Davis. Davis sweepstakes next 2 days.
It's interesting.
Starting over.
It's
the
interesting.
entire league is rooting for them to panic and put those picks on the table. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. Number 21 and number.
And for sure. And there's no doubt that of all the people, of all the GMs who have valuable assets on their team in the league, is Pelinka number one best candidate to panic? Probably. His team, he used the mid-level exception that they had last offseason to sign Lonnie Walker IV. Again, no offense to Lonnie. That guy is a 3-and-D guy who has never shot the three that consistently well in San Antonio and doesn't play defense that well, especially within a team concept. He's just, the fact that San Antonio let him go was a really dangerous sign. That's not someone, San Antonio, a very smart organization. They do make mistakes, of course, but the fact that they just let him go is not a good sign. Like, that's not a situation where you're like, okay, well, this doesn't present any questions. We're just going to use our full mid-level to try to enhance our depth with this guy. Like, that was not something I would have done. But it's interesting.
Number 20 in a category called Panic Time. You can guess one of the teams. Minnesota. 10-11.
Oh, yeah.
Just lost Towns for multiple weeks. Humiliated in the Golden State game a few days ago. When it
was not close.
Clear that Towns and Gobert, against any team that has scoring and spacing, it's going to be a nightmare for them. The Towns Gobert thing, you might remember me saying in the summer repeatedly on a podcast.
Oh, you're screaming about it.
Agreeing with me vehemently that this had a chance to be one of the worst NBA trades of all time. We're creeping closer and closer, my friends.
And I mean, listen, there was some split. I remember Kevin O'Connor, who's a guy who's very smart and whose opinion I respect, disagreed with Bill on this. I don't think anyone in their right mind, however, would even try to make the case that this was an even trade. I mean, they drastically overpaid, meaning Minnesota, regardless of how you slice it. And again, it wasn't just all the picks, which were monumental. There was also under the radar for those who might not be, experienced basketball fans or people who study the Timberwolves roster. I wouldn't necessarily blame you. But Jared Vanderbilt and Beasley, but especially Vanderbilt, that guy is another guy, a great example of a winning player, a smart player, very good hustle, solid one-on-one defender on a team without a lot of great one-on-one defenders. He is a guy who is excellent glue that helps you win playoff series. He was really good in the Memphis series. And Beasley is a guy who had a tough start last year, but Beasley is an assassin, man. He is a guy who can come off the bench, as he's demonstrated in Utah, and shoot 40+%. He's done this over a long period of time. And when he's engaged, he can defend. He's not engaged all the time, which is a problem. But as he gets more consistent throughout his career, that guy could absolutely be a starting two guard, the fourth or fifth best player on a championship team. And even right now, his floor is pretty solid. He's at least absolutely a great three-point shooter. Can make an open three, can make 7-8 threes in a game off the bench if you need an offensive spark plug. That's a guy who's really valuable, really valuable. And so despite that, they didn't necessarily give those guys away, but they threw those guys in as part of the trade. I would have fought tooth and nail to avoid that. I understand you need to include salary in these types of trades, but those are not the guys I would have included if there was any choice in the matter, especially Vanderbilt. That guy is a winning player again. And there aren't that many winning players who you can throw in throughout the league who aren't drastically paid, who aren't very steeply paid. So that was a big mistake, And the other problem is with the Towns Gobert thing, and this is something that was relatively predictable, I think. Unfortunately, Karl Anthony is a guy who has never been a good defender, really. He always struggled with defensive rebounding, and that was a that came to a head last year, which probably pushed them to make the trade, Minnesota, because they outplayed Memphis for like 85% of that series. Memphis was not the better team for most of the stretches of play in that series. A lot of big comebacks by Memphis, and those comebacks were spurred by the reality that they just could not keep Brandon Clark off the glass. They could not protect their defensive glass at all. And so they're like, hey, we need to go get Rudy Gobert. Fine. It's not the silliest thinking of all time, but how you go about it, in my opinion, had to be better than that. And, Trader Danny made out with a huge haul in that trade for Utah. They've really benefited. They really have. So, again, now that Karl is out for a while, and he's their biggest defensive issue for sure, because again, Karl hasn't always been a great defensive player, but this year he's been especially bad. He doesn't seem to understand where to stand. He doesn't cover well on the perimeter, hasn't been engaged on the perimeter covering. He's been roasted consistently. He hasn't defensive rebounded well. He just has really been an abject disaster switching. It's a disaster. It was a disaster with him on the floor defensively. So now at least Minnesota gets an extended stretch where their lineups are simplified. And we'll see what Chris Finch can do, who is a good offensive mind. We'll see what he can do with the personnel he has, and if he can figure some things out before Towns comes back. When it's nice, it wasn't that devastating an injury.
This was an awful trade. And now there's a new wrinkle, because if Towns is out for a while,
4 weeks,
and the West is really good, and all of a sudden Minnesota starts creeping toward that bottom 5 in the West. They're 10 or 11 right now. Minnesota giving Utah the Wembanyama pick in this year's draft would be the single craziest.
It would be insane.
I think
it would be absolutely insane
in the NBA.
For sure.
I'm trying to think of anything crazier than that. You could the Brooklyn Nets thing, Kobe and Shaq breaking up, Harden demanding to be traded twice. Like, you go through it. I think Utah getting the Wemby pick, another French guy in the Gobert trade, that would top everything.
It'd be pretty funny.
And by the way,
for
A-Rod
sure.
is one of the owners of Minnesota, which I think is hilarious. This would be yet another embarrassing title for him. So you have them, and you have Atlanta at number 20. I do wonder if Atlanta...
Perhaps A-Rod's greatest skill, creating embarrassing situations for himself. From kissing his mirror to having that half-horse picture. As A-Rod is really spectacular, maybe better than anybody else at unintentionally embarrassing himself. He's amazing at it. And which is really funny is he's actually a very good baseball commentator. I enjoy his work. He's not at all annoying to listen to. He doesn't really overcomplicate. I think he does a good job, but oh my goodness, it's a public figure. Yikes.
2021 Eastern Conference run was probably the worst thing that could have happened to them. It made them think, I think they were closer than maybe they are. I didn't like when they gave up Herter when it happened.
He's dead right here. He's absolutely right here. One of the worst things you can do as an NBA GM or as a personnel director on any professional sports franchise, there are two cardinal sins that I would point out. The first one is misevaluating your own talent. One thing you absolutely have to do is when someone is in your building and you have the ability to see them practice in fair conditions all the time over a long period of time, you have to be able to evaluate them and decide, should we trade them? What their value is? Do we want to keep them long term? Do they fit on our team? How do we need to change our roster if they do fit on our team? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And giving away Herter there was like, this guy has tremendous amounts of value. I just don't understand. And another one, which I have to point out when we'll get to the Grizzlies, is DeAnthony Melton. So we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, giving away Herter, he's been brilliant for the Kings. Lighting the beam up all the time. So it didn't make any sense. Bill's dead right here.
They got a protected pick from the Kings. And I just like Herter. I value Herter. I think he's a winning player. And I don't like giving guys away like that. Somebody they need. They need three-point shooting. You just can't give away valuable pieces for free. And that's another great, we talk about cardinal sins in player personnel. Another one by Pelinka, right? Caruso was willing to come back to the Lakers at a discount. A guy who his lineup numbers with LeBron were spectacular. LeBron loved playing with. He's a really smart player. A guy who plays really well within a defensive team concept, rotates well, helps well, gets in passing lanes, is good on the fast break. Just a smart player, and the type of guy who LeBron fits very well with. And this guy they just gave him away. Essentially, they just let him leave in free agency for nothing. And it's like, that dude was willing to come back at a discount. It is a cardinal sin
not valuing guys who you had in your building. And that's how you build a losing team. It is.
Got a guy who's a great three-point shooter. Gave him away for like 55 cents a dollar.
If that.
Panic time for both of those teams because they don't have their picks. Atlanta, at least, the picks in the Murray trade, their own picks don't start until 2025, but not great. They kind of made their move. Now it's like, hey, anyone want John Collins? They've been shopping John Collins, I think, since before the pandemic.
5 years. It's crazy.
So I don't know if there's like a huge John Collins market right now, I'm guessing. Capella would be another one. He's playing well. Maybe you could trade him, but
he is playing well.
Panic time for both of those teams.
Capella, to his credit, has done a good job developing from where he was with the Rockets and on those James Harden spread the floor teams where they were playing Harden ball and he was just a lob threat at the rim. He has diversified his offensive game a bit and he has looked really spry coming back from injury. He's done a good job rim protecting. He is a different player on the defensive end this year than he was last year. That's been good for them, for sure.
I know Atlanta's 11-10, but if you've actually watched
easy schedule
the season and you've watched them play, like there's some weird chemistry stuff with them. They can't shoot, which is weird.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, oh, we gave away Herter and now we can't shoot. And the thing is, one really important thing, and I think this is the crux of Atlanta for the next couple of years in terms of whether they can win multiple playoff rounds. It's really interesting because when they traded for Dejounte Murray, right, the question became, okay, a lot of Dejounte Murray's value comes with him being able to handle the ball and him using his length, his athleticism on defense as well to cover over for some of Trey's foibles on the defensive end. Trey, similarly to Steph Curry when Steph came into the league, he's made great strides since. Trey, just easy post up, just one of the worst defensive players in basketball individually. And so Dejounte can take some of the more difficult matchups on the defensive end. But on the offensive end, for Dejounte to have his greatest or approach his greatest value ceiling, he needs to handle the ball a lot. What does that mean? That means that Trey then needs to improve his value off the ball. He needs to become more of a Steph guy who's jogging and using gravity of the floor to create space for others and be a threat and a catch and shoot player. And we haven't seen Trey do that on a consistent basis or really much at all early in his career. And so the question now becomes, can Trey do that? Can Trey develop that? He's a smart player. He's certainly capable. The question is whether or not they can do that. Are they going to use him as a screener? More sort of intricate offensive options in the pick and roll. See that diversity. We'll see if Nate McMillan uses that. See if he has the want to, if his players buy into that type of thing. But for them to approach their offensive ceiling, in my opinion, they need to do more of that type of thing. And Trey needs to really increase his value, the value that he can bring to the table off the ball.
Because they have Trey and they have Murray, who is supposed to be at least a good shooter. But the Nate McMillan thing's getting a little weird. I don't know. But watch that team. That team is the team that I could see them going on a 6-game winning streak, or I could see them going on an 8-game losing streak. Next,
the latter's more likely, in my opinion.
Now we're getting into some fun territory, and this speaks to how deep the league is. Frisky and lovable, I have as the next category. 5 teams: Washington, 11-10; Utah, 12-11.
That title really fits Utah extraordinarily well. They are. I know people love watching Sacramento. They are a brilliant offensive team. I understand it. But I like watching Utah the most. Utah is the team that if you were to choose a team early in this year who are both a surprise and absolutely brilliant to watch, Utah. Absolutely. Let's see what he says about them.
Number 17, Portland's 11-9. Sacramento are league pass MVP at 10-9. And then Indiana at 12-8.
See, I think Utah is the league pass MVP.
The most improbable team, I guess they're a team, not only on this list, but Jesus, like I can't believe they're the 15th best team in the league. I thought they're going to be like the 29th or 30th best team.
And see, that's in a nut. That's 2 things. One, I'm thrilled for Miles Turner. He's like 26 years old and he's been so injured, right? He can't stay on the floor. He has been not good, not solid. He's been brilliant. He has been transformative defensively for Indiana, because Indiana at the beginning of the season were just all pace, no defense whatsoever. They were giving up like 20-point leads relatively regularly. Miles has come in and steadied them at the defensive end. He's a tremendous shot changer on the defensive glass, and it's been really impressive. Another guy similarly to Anthony Davis, although obviously not to the same level, he has resurrected his value. in trade if they were willing to trade him. He's played so well, they actually might decide to consider giving him an extension, right? I don't know whether he'd be amenable to that, but he has been so good early in the season. It's been great to watch. And then, of course, Halliburton is just a brilliant distributor, and he makes them better. He makes the younger players better, especially his calmness on the floor, his intelligence. He might be the most intelligent player in the league alongside LeBron. Just a brilliant offensive mind. You can see it in the passes he makes, how he changes pace, how he reads the floor. Markel, another guy, super smart, you know. And Mathurin, their rookie, I pronounce it in French because he's from Montreal, as am I, but unbelievable. Like that pick, that guy might be the most likely all-star other than Paolo, in my opinion, thus far. He has all-star written all over him.
I look at this list and
Gets to the rim really well, great at drawing fouls. Just really good. His aggression, while not being headless, you know, just all the way to the rim aggression, is really smart.
you just have to think of the trades.
Impressive.
Each team is frisky and lovable partly because of some awesome trade that they made. Like
For sure.
Washington, they trade Westbrook to the Lakers. They get
Oh my gosh, that trade was such a coup de grace for that Washington front office. It is amazing. Got Kuzma back. It is so amazing what they did there. And again, they made you know, lemonade that was worth billions, you know, out of lemons there, because Russ went to them, right? That offseason, he went to the front office, and this is no shot at Russ. And he said, okay, I would love to go to Los Angeles. That's where where I'm from, went to UCLA, etc. I would love to play there. If not, I'm all in on your team. And no problem with that whatsoever. And the Washington front office was like, okay, we'll see what we can do. And they were not between a rock and a hard place, because Russ said he would still stay and play for them. So that was not a devastating piece of news. And Washington then absolutely destroyed that trade.
pick back.
Maximized his value, sold at max value. It's incredible.
You get Kuzma, who's at $13 million, who I have on my trade value list. I couldn't believe it, but I kind of couldn't leave him off. He's in the 60s. They got Monte Morris for KCP.
That, again, I don't dislike Monte Morris. That trade, I think, actually made a lot of sense for both when it was made. KCP's actually been, to his credit, has been brilliant with the Nuggets. He has brought, they at the end of the series that they played against the Warriors, we're speaking of the Nuggets now, at the end of last year, they were like, okay, what was our biggest issue other than consistency of scoring and Aaron Gordon having to take too many threes from the corner, unfortunately, in those offensive games? Their issue was they could not guard on the perimeter. They couldn't guard Jordan Poole. They couldn't guard Steph. Obviously, no one really can, but they couldn't even really challenge the guard motion that Golden State likes to go to really consistently. And so they're like, okay, KCP is a guy, a trade target that we can have who would really help there. And he has. He has a lot left to give on the defensive end. He shot the ball well, which usually happens when you play with Jokic. The problem is for Morris and for Bill Barton, unfortunately, they've really suffered, I think, from not playing with Jokic. There's going to be at least a small downturn, even if the role is similar, which it has been for Morris. There's going to be a small downturn of not playing with an offensive genius, an offensive savant who understands ball movement and putting guys in positions to succeed shooting-wise, and using double teams against the defense, etc. There's no one who understands that better than Jokic, really. And they benefited, and then they don't have that this year. So that's an unfortunate thing for them, but that's the reality of getting traded sometimes.
They got a first-round pick out of it. Russ is making $47 million this year, and now Beal is
starting
to show signs of looking like Beal from 2 years ago. They're fun.
They're fun.
I don't want to say House is doing backflips about the Washington sports scene right now, but the C words are looking good. The Wiz are fun to watch.
Get commanded upon.
There's a little Porzingis comeback, a tiny one.
And I think Bill's underselling this here. Porzingis could have had 50 points the other night. Porzingis was he had something like, 38 points at halftime or something, like 39 points at halftime. It was unbelievable what he did. He was absolutely off the chain. He was efficient. And the thing is, which is why I love seeing this from Anthony Davis, the last piece to come back, especially for big men who have been injured, is that engagement, that second jump, and that explosiveness defensively, the movement, the fluidity, the body movement. And you see that from Porzingis now. He's really contesting shots at the rim. He's coming out of nowhere to get blocks. He looks like a younger, spry version of himself. That guy's another guy, along with Kuzma, who has tremendous trade value if the Wizards want to trade him.
Like,
they've got a lot of options.
He might have 50 points last night. Kind of resurgence. So you got Washington, you got Utah at number 18, which, you know, we knew they would crash back to earth. It's going to be interesting how far they crash. They basically lost Mike Conley. They had a hard schedule, but they lost Mike Conley, and, you know, all of a sudden it became a little harder for them top rate in the clutch. I think the West is so tight, they still have to kind of wait around and see what happens. But if they continue to free fall, they'll start trading.
Oh yeah, they'll start selling people off. But one of the ultimate ironies, other than the fact that they might get that pick, which would be unbelievable if the Timberwolves actually finish below them, that would be crazy. But like, especially if the Timberwolves finish far below them. But at the end of the day, the craziest thing maybe is the fact that Walker Kessler is a revelation. That young dude is just, we knew that he was going to be a good shot blocker and shot changer at the rim because he was, you know, he played in the SEC, which was a very athletic league last year. He was just amazing on the defensive glass, changed basically every shot that was anywhere near him. And he has been crazy good and a good lob threat. He understands where to be on defense. His spacing is good. He's been well coached in college. And that guy being good and being, you know, a very poor man still at this point, a poor man's version of Rudy Gobert. He could be a slightly poor man's Rudy Gobert in a year and a half if he continues to develop, which is, you know, if that's an aspect of that trade, it is devastating that Minnesota didn't have him.
People, I would be very careful about trading Jordan Clarkson, though, because wherever the league is going, hey, he's the guy that makes sense.
Well, he's just always been a bucket, you know, and there are some guys who are just a walking bucket, and he's shown it in the starting lineup. He's not a sixth man anymore this year. He's been an unbelievable spark plug in the starting lineup, consistent. You know, he'll never be the most efficient player of all time, but he's a great, consistent source of points. And that's the thing about that Utah team. That's why I find them specifically so entertaining and so crazy to watch, because that Utah team is so reliably offensively talented. They're really well coached. It's crazy the Celtics lost to, you know, certainly there's a huge discussion to be had, which we won't get into here, about Ime Udoka. But they lost two very talented coaches. Hardy's really good as well. He's done a great job with that offense, giving them structure, a very young team and a bit of a scattershot team, but they've played very well together. And that team is not a good defensive team in terms of raw talent, but one of his skills, which he really used in the Celtics situation last year, is he is a great defensive innovator. And I think they have a chance to be a team that the whole defensively is greater than the sum of their parts. And that's coaching to me. So that's a really well coached team. That's a team that it's not a team that I would want to face, especially on the road, because you know that is an offensively explosive team. That's a loud arena, good fan base. That's a really, really tough situation to go into. Not a fun road game. And they have legitimate scorers. They have Laurie, who's coming in off Eurobasket and looks spectacular. He's so perfect for that team specifically, where there's no pressure. Can run the floor, shoot threes in transition, attack the basket if need be. You know, that team is really fun. Pleasure to watch.
Portland at 17, 11-9. They've had some luck with some of those.
The Lakers game was hilarious.
But on the other hand, they're better than I thought I would be. So that's a backhanded compliment. Like, they won that ridiculous Jeremy Grant game where he took 4 steps backwards. They won a Knicks game where Brunson hits an 8-footer in the end of regulation. I watched that game.
And one thing that is really important to note two things for the Blazers, actually. One, I would still trade Dame. I understand that would obviously severely handicap their talent level and their ability to win multiple playoff series, but I don't think that they're really a contender anyway. Now, that's less of a certain thing to say than it is in the East, where you have two, in my opinion, absolutely sublime, playoff-tested, well-coached teams in Boston and Milwaukee, where you have to go through those teams, or at least one of them, to get to the finals. The West is much more wide open. But even though that's the case, I don't think Portland is a team that can win multiple playoffs. I just don't see it, no matter who the matchups are. So that being the case, it's very, very difficult to then justify keeping Dame around. You know, if you can recoup some value, if he comes back and he looks healthy, he's injured right now, but you want to build around Simons. I think that Simons contract could be a bargain. I love that guy. And, you know, they really nailed the draft this year, I thought. So, you know,
they would have won that. They had another buzzer beater. They've been missing Dame for a couple weeks. They don't really have a lot to trade. The Grant trade looks like it was good. It looks like they hit with Sharp. And
that's it. Sharp is, I think he could be an absolute stud. He does things on the floor. This is very simplistic, but he does things on the floor that scream top 5 pick. Like he had a dunk against the Lakers the other night. This put back dunk, I think it was at the end of the third quarter, something like that, where he just goes up and his head almost hits the rim. Just an absolute, like, jump out of the gym, jump out of your seats level play. That, and he shot it really well. He hasn't been the most efficient player overall offensively. The advanced stats aren't really kind to him, but he shot the ball totally fine overall. And I think that guy could really be excellent. You know, he could really be a guy who might make an all-star team in 3 years if he continues to develop and he gets the playing time. So I would have no problem trading Dame and building around those two dudes. So we'll see whether or not they do, Portland. But I would recoup value for Dame now before he gets too far down the road, personally. And the thing is, obviously, Jeremy Grant, you know, it's really interesting because he has gone from one end of the spectrum in Denver, where you look at his value, he did a lot of great things in not that much offensive burden. In other words, he was 4th or 5th on that team in terms of shots, but he was really efficient with them, and he wanted a greater role. He bet on himself. He went to Detroit, totally fine. The problem is he's not young LeBron James, right? So he was asked, in my opinion, to do too much on those Detroit teams. He's not a guy who will go, 1-on-2 and beat guys off the dribble and, score against a really good contest that when they know he's coming. It takes a Hall of Fame caliber player to elevate a team like that, which just wasn't these teams just weren't very good in Detroit. They weren't ready to even compete. And so I think they asked too much of Jeremy. That doesn't mean he's a bad player. I think he's an excellent player. And I think you're seeing that this year where he's surrounded by better offensive options, Simons, etc. And you see Nurkic. And you see him be able to have a balanced look at the floor where it's not too tilted defensively towards where he's going to attack. And he's attacked really well. It was brilliant in the Lakers game the other day. He shot the ball like lights out from 3 at reasonable volume. He has been unbelievable because I think he's in the middle now where he's not asked to do too much as he was in Detroit. He's not too minimal a part of the offense, even amongst great offensive players as he was in Denver, but he's right in that middle where he gets enough shots and he can get, some good ISOs up and whatever, but he is able to kind of spread his wings enough that he's still really efficient and can take advantage of floor spacing, and he's not asked to do too much. There isn't too much of a burden.
And they're malleable. They could be a seller, they could be a buyer.
True.
Sacramento is my favorite team.
He loves Sacramento.
Celtics. I watch as much of their games as possible. They have the most players that I like on one team. I love Sabonis. You know how I feel about Malik Monk. I kept all my stock. Now I feel...
No, Malik Monk, horrific defender, obviously. But he is a guy who he will put his head down and go to the rim, and he'll get there most of the time. He shot the ball really well. He comes off their bench. He is a great Jordan Clarkson type guy. A guy who you can plug in and be like, okay, Malik, we need 27 from you tonight. Malik's like, all right, give me the shots and it's going to happen, come hell or high water. And he's been really good. He's actually been really efficient. I like him as a player. He's got a nice offensive bag. And you saw that with the Lakers last year. He was one of the bright spots in a relatively hilarious season. But that team, and you got to give De'Aaron Fox credit, because De'Aaron Fox, this is going to be a long segment, so buckle up. De'Aaron Fox is a guy who came into the league and who I was like, wow, they got him after Lonzo. I think he's going to be better than Lonzo. I have tremendous belief in him. And although he's a dynamic offensive player, obviously does get steals. His defense, his ability to play defense consistently and stay in front of his man, both at the point of attack and in terms of rotations, cognizance defensively of what's going on around him, switching rotations. He has been I don't think I'm overstating it by saying up until this year, he's been an unmitigated disaster. Absolutely terrible. A really, really, really bad defensive player, both, again, at the point of attack and as part of a team concept. Again, now we switch to this offseason where he actually, I read a story the other day, he got married and he was in the gym like 4 or 5 days later, maybe even sooner, working on the different offensive sets they wanted to run and working on being a more cognizant, well-equipped defender. Because again, Mike Brown, a defensive coach, a guy who did an amazing job coordinating the Warriors defense last year, which when Draymond was in the lineup and certainly in the finals was brilliant, really, really good, very good defensive coach, great attention to detail. And if Fox was going to play the way he played defense in previous years, that was going to be a big source of conflict. And Fox, to his great credit, has buckled down. He's been much better defensively. I still need to see it, over multiple seasons, but he has been a lot better this year. And his offensive dynamism, which Sabonis definitely helps with, great roller, great screener, really good passer, can catch the ball in the high post and facilitate. Sabonis can. Those guys, and to Sacramento's credit, they identified a guy in Sabonis who they felt could be brilliant in terms of his ability to both open up Fox's game and facilitate for others. Obviously, still, they're never going to be a great defensive team because even if Fox makes strides, he's never going to be an all-defensive team guy. And unfortunately, Sabonis is a guy who, although he tries hard and understands where to be defensively, he is severely handicapped in terms of physical traits, right? His arms are like this. If he's your guy who's contesting a shot at the rim, he's the anti-Gobert, the anti-Walker Kessler. He's got really short arms, and he's just not a guy who you want being your major rim protector, unfortunately. That doesn't mean he doesn't try, doesn't mean he can't play defense and rotate and et cetera, but he tries hard. And so Mike Brown has done a good job coaching them up to be, again, in a similar way to Utah, better than the sum of their parts thus far. Good enough that they can compete on that end of the floor, which is really important.
I feel like it's like having Apple stock from 2002. He's fantastic. Fox, they trade Halliburton to kind of give Fox the ball. Fox is now really fun to watch. He was somebody I never liked watching. I've enjoyed them this year.
And the thing is, you could see it offensively, again, not defensively, but you could see it when Fox came back. He played like 20 games at the end of last year once they traded Halliburton, and there was no longer that lack of certainty as to who should be the offensive initiator, how they should share the ball. There was an awkwardness that, in my opinion, made them both worse on Sacramento, Halliburton and Fox, because that dual ball handler role just didn't really work out. Fox, again, in a similar way to Dejounte Murray, derives a lot of his value from having the ball in his hands and handling it. And so that made it awkward with Halliburton having those dual ball handlers on the floor. And so, but despite that, Fox at the end of last year was put into a position where he was the sole ball handler. And then all of a sudden, that opened up his game tremendously. Shot the ball really well, worked well with Sabonis the floor. It looked like it was spaced a bit better. They were a little less of a slog in the half court, and he was amazing. He was great. And he's carried that into this year, to his great credit.
I love Herter. I'm excited about Keegan Murray, and they're just really fun. I was going to tweet this, but I think only 5 people would have gotten the joke. To me, they're the Kevin Owens of the NBA.
I don't understand that, Joe.
Probably going to lose half their matches. Maybe they'll win 53% of their matches. The matches are always fun, and they'll sell out for the other team. The other team ends up looking great in the game, no matter what happens. I like Sacramento, and then you have Indiana at 12-8, and Sacramento and Indiana are linked because of that trade they made last year, which was Halliburton and Hield for Sabonis. This is one of the most fun trades of the past 12 years. It was fun when it happened. Now it's super fun because it's the rare trade where both teams got better.
Oh, yeah.
Sabonis has been really good for the Kings, and he's also unleashed Fox because Fox didn't have to share. Had this weird thing with Halliburton where it was clear Halliburton was really good, whose team was it. Now Sabonis comes in, fits in great with Fox. Fox has been unleashed. He's having a career year. Indiana gets Halliburton and Hield. They take Mathurin, who
amazing,
has been one of the best rookies.
So good.
Is just an absolute beast. Sacramento gets exactly what they want in this trade. Works out perfectly. And they lost the trade. And they lost it badly because
they did. And that was my opinion at the time. This might feel like revisionist history, but I promise it's not. The reality is, again, Sacramento looked at that and they said, we want to get Domantas Sabonis. And I don't blame them at all. Again, it made it was a very good evaluation in terms of who would fit well with Fox from an organizational perspective. They did a good job. The issue is the other side. Once you decide to trade a player, a young player of the value of Tyrese Halliburton, I can't imagine how they could possibly have misevaluated his value, considering that he, number one, how few people want to be in Sacramento long term, want to be part of that rebuild. He cried when they traded him. He literally cried. That kind of attachment to a team, especially a losing team, which they have been for a very long time, is very rare. And he's so smart, and he's such a good team player, and he's such a great facilitator. His basketball IQ is absolutely through the roof. A guy of that age was like 21 at the time. Trading that guy, once you make that decision, if you're going to make it, and again, I disagreed with that at the time, but if you decide, okay, this is the right thing for our franchise at this point, we are going to give this guy away to another team. Once that decision is made, then you canvass the league, you look around, you're like, okay, everybody else, the other 29 teams, we are trading Tyrese Halliburton. Send up the bat signal. Send us all of your best offers. According to a lot of reports, they didn't do that. They were just like, oh, yeah, okay, we're going to trade Tyrese Halliburton. I guess we'll throw him into this trade for this guy that we want, like right before the deadline. They did not canvass the league properly. I'm sure that there were tons of teams, like the Wizards, like all of these different teams, who would have given up multiple first-round picks probably for him. You know, that guy was, when he was traded, one of the best assets in the NBA, full stop. And they gave up cost control over him for like another 5+ years. It just it didn't make any sense to me at the time. It didn't make any sense to me now. Just the way that they went about the part of the process where we've decided to trade Tyrese Halliburton. Now then, if you make that decision, you then have to maximize what you can get, as Danny Ainge did over the summer with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. The Kings didn't do that. And considering, again, the value of the asset that they had on their hands, that to me is franchise mismanagement. Even though, again, they made a trade for a guy who I think is really good. And again, they did a really good job evaluating how he would fit with Fox. That's great. You still have to maximize your asset. And in my opinion, they didn't come close.
Halliburton is turning into a franchise guy. I had him on my trade value list, spoiler alert, and this might change by the time we actually publish it. I have him 24th right now. I have him between Siakam and Dame. He runs the team. I loved him in college. As you remember, I thought he should be a top 3 pick.
So smart.
I was outraged that Phoenix passed on him at 10. He's better than I thought he was going to be in 2000.
Oh, me too.
To be fair, just as I'm praising myself, I also thought Tyrell Terry was going to be one of the 10 best players in the draft. So, look, I'm not perfect.
I don't know if he's played a minute, Tyrell Terry.
11, 12 assists every game. Great decisions. Makes everyone better. Good shooter. I love watching him. The Lakers play was so great at the end of the game where they get the offensive rebound. He's got like 5 seconds left. In 5 seconds, he figures out exactly how much time he has left, takes his time. The Lakers think he's going to shoot because the clock's running down. And he's like, nah, I'm going to take an extra second here. And then whips this crazy cross-court pass to the rookie who sinks the 3 because LeBron fell asleep. And it was like, how many guys in the league would have made that play? I don't know.
So few.
Less than 5.
Yeah, it's 5 or fewer.
Halliburton is ridiculous. I have Mathurin 48th. I'm going to learn how to pronounce his name.
I love him. Mathurin in French.
Eventually. But you think like with Halliburton, the 2020 draft wreckage from the pandemic year where just you knew there was going to be some variance, but Golden State has 2. You know, if Halliburton gets into March Madness, maybe he rises. Maybe he actually would have had to be a top 4 pick if his college made a run during Madness. Wiseman, if you'd been able to interview him or work him out, maybe you don't like him as much, but when you're doing everything on Zoom and you have 3 games to work off, I still think the Wiseman pick's super defensible. To me, it's no different than quarterbacks in the NFL where you take a top 5 pick and it's like Zach Wilson, Sam Darnold.
This is really interesting. When he gets to the end of this, we'll discuss it.
You know, whoever, you have 50-50 chance. and there's a 50% chance it's not going to work. But if it does work, all of a sudden you have somebody incredible, right? You have trying to think. Well, Mahomes went later than the top five, but you end up in like a Mahomes, um, Justin Herbert's another example, and they took the swing, and it doesn't look like it's worked out. It doesn't look like he has the hoops IQ to hang with that team. I still think it was defensible, but man, if they had more information on Halliburton, I really wonder if they would have taken him there because he's like the perfect warrior. Washington at number 9 should be kicking themselves too. But
I don't
anyway,
think they were ever going to take him. One, not at 2. The reality is, though, and it's a fair point to bring up, because absolutely, as Bill is dead right, they were really hamstrung in the evaluation process, as most teams were, because they just didn't get because of the pandemic, they didn't get to evaluate the players to the degree that they would want to. And that is a huge disadvantage. There's no doubt about it, especially with the tools and the kind of experience and the understanding that they have of competitiveness and the importance of understanding the person behind the stats. If you're going to draft a player, they were really hamstrung in that area. That being said, the Warriors do deserve a bit of criticism because, for instance, that they could have traded that pick to the Knicks. The Knicks would have loved to have taken LaMelo at 2 there. And the Warriors could have traded back and maybe gotten a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, someone like that. There were a lot of players with good value who were going outside the top 5 there. If they had traded picks with the Knicks, that would have been a really nice one. But again, Bill is absolutely correct. If Wiseman had worked out, it would have been an absolute coup for the Warriors. And unfortunately, they just didn't have any information. They just didn't. And it was very difficult to recoup any. The guy just had not played organized basketball, past high school. He played like 3 games in college at Memphis. It just was not going to happen in a way that was going to give them any kind of baseline to properly evaluate this prospect. It just was not going to happen. They had to take much more of a guess than I'm sure they would have liked to. It didn't work out, or it hasn't worked out yet. I'm very skeptical, unfortunately, for James, unless he has some sort of amazing bounce back movement in his ability to play. Because the thing is, unfortunately for that young man, you have to be so good as a young player right away in terms of your ability to process the game and your ability to fit into a defensive scheme, especially to stay on the floor. And James just has not played enough organized basketball that he has gotten the rhythm down of playing defense and drop coverage, those types of things, standing in the right spot. His biggest issue, which is fouling. James has a reaching fetish. Every time a guy goes by him, he'll be in perfect position, huge dude, ready to contest at the rim, and then he'll reach down to a guy who's like 6'5" and swipe at the ball. He racks up fouls like that dude who had the FTX exchange racked up stupid investments before he went bankrupt. It was like unbelievable to watch him as part of a defensive unit. Sometimes he's playing with Draymond Green where you're coached on the floor. You're put in the right spot where you don't have to do that much. You just have to contest. And he just was not standing in the right spot. He was not good coverage-wise. And his offensive game, his engagement, he's getting frustrated, and you could tell. He just hasn't had the ability to consistently get on the floor and work out the kinks in the NBA. And whether or not that happens, I'm not sure it's going to happen with the Warriors. Because, again, that's the difficult aspect of having a team that you want to bridge from one era with Clay, Steph, Draymond to another. It's just so difficult to find opportunities for these younger players to grow and make mistakes when you want to win every game and get the best seed you can, right? It's very difficult.
I have Indiana at 15, and Halliburton's a big reason. That trade was awesome, and I don't think they can tank. I think they have too much talent. If anything, I would be looking to maybe add to what you have. And what's interesting, they seemed like they gave away Brogdon, and they did to some degree because they wanted to create some minutes. But Nesmith's not terrible. They got a pick out of it. They got playing time for the guys they wanted. So the trade was defensible. It's a little like the Portland trade when they traded McCollum. It seemed like they didn't get enough for him, but they got a pick that they could use. They got Josh Hart back. Then they were able to make the second trade for Grant. And then after you saw the totality of it, it made sense. And maybe that's what's going to happen with that Brogdon trade.
Could be.
Next category. Now we're down to the top 14. You didn't think this gimmick was going to work. You're kind of enjoying it.
Okay, Bill.
Teams here. This category is called Let's Wait a Month. Number 14, Miami. They're 10 and 11. Number 13, Brooklyn, 11 and 11. Number 12, Dallas, 10 and 10. Number 11, Toronto, 11 and 9. Here's what I'm going to say. Let's wait a month. Go through all the teams. Miami, you know, health wise, I don't know. How many games are you getting from Jimmy Butler per season at this point?
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? With Miami, we saw it last night. At their apex, including the fact that they don't have much depth. Their depth is not very good, especially without Oladipo, who unfortunately couldn't hit the broadside of a barn last year in the playoffs. But he still provided really good defense and some good minutes, even despite his offensive challenges. They don't have much depth, but they can still really compete. They're still brilliantly coached. Spo is, needs no introduction. He's a Hall of Fame coach track guy. And when Jimmy plays, that guy is capable of, I don't want to overuse the word amazing, but he is capable of amazing things. He hit a couple shots down the stretch yesterday against the Celtics that were, you sit in your seat and you're like, how in the hell did that dude make that shot? Just amazing, over amazing contest. The same types of shots that Steph was making against the Celtics in Game 4 of the finals last year. It's like, that is a Hall of Fame shot. It's unbelievable. It's nothing more that you can do. And so when Jimmy plays at that level of that caliber, he is capable of bringing them into any series. The problem is, again, I don't think that with their lineups as they're currently constructed, we're speaking of Miami now, I don't think that they can beat a Boston or a Milwaukee in a 7-game series. They benefited from the Celtics still missing Robert Williams last night, and also the Celtics missed a huge number of threes, like really good looks in a way that they haven't all season. Now, they've been overshooting the ball a bit in terms of like the efficiency they've gotten from the 3-point line, but still, the Celtics missed a lot yesterday. And over the course of a 7-game series, very unlikely, even against good switching defense, that they're going to miss that much. Because there are some difficult spots in a lot of Miami's lineups defensively, even though they're well coached. Bam, though, to his great credit, I talked about it at the beginning of the year, Bam was going to need to take the next step offensively for them to be able to win multiple playoff rounds in the Eastern Conference this year. And he really has. He's started stepping out a bit more, taking more jumpers, being more efficient. He's a really great player on the ascension. And this was the tipping point year for him, where he needed to take more control of more offensive possessions and give them efficiency while doing so. And he's done that. He needs to continue to do so, though.
55. Have you seen Lowry? He's just going to be 15 pounds, above his 2013 playing weight for the rest of his career, I think. I don't trust him to stay healthy. Hero's already gotten hurt. They have no bench. No idea when Oladipo's coming back. It's a team that's kind of hanging around, but if you really watch them, and I said this to Verno and House 2 weeks ago, I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with this team. Bam is playing great, but defensively, really, it's just Bam and Butler when he's playing. Other than that, they're like playing zones. They have Hero at forward sometimes. The big test for them is going to be they have 2 games in a row in Boston, Wednesday and Friday. And this Boston team, which we'll talk to in a second, is a fucking offensive machine.
Amazing.
And I don't know if Miami defensively is ready for this machine.
I agree with that. Totally.
You don't want to bet against Miami.
Again, it's still staggering with Jimmy as injured as he was last year that they made that Celtics team. And again, Robert Williams was certainly a bit hobbled, which affected that series. But the fact that series was close, the fact that Jimmy almost won that series at the end of Game 7, again, is a testament to the reality that in a 7-game series, coaching really matters. Continuity, trust in each other at both ends of the floor. And the Heat have that. They really, really do. And that allows you to win a lot of series that you might not necessarily think you can just on the basis of talent.
So to me, it's like we're using the past performance and Heat culture and all that stuff, and we're trying to carry it over into this new season when they're not the same team, and we're gonna know one way or the other. I'm not saying that they won't be good in these next 2 games in Boston, because they might be, and it might feel like the Eastern Finals and all that stuff. I don't trust it. My bet would be that they're not the same team, but we're gonna find out.
I don't disagree with that.
Brooklyn getting an incredible KD season, which we'll talk about in 1 second. But the Kyrie trade is the big thing for me. They got to get him off the team. He's playing pretty well.
See, that's interesting. I don't agree. I have a YouTube video coming on this relatively soon. I don't agree at all that you necessarily have to. If you look at Brooklyn, and Bill obviously didn't see this game last night, but if you look at Brooklyn with TJ Warren coming back now, if they have the ability to and Jacques Vaughn can somehow get them to play some lineups. There are a lot of bad defenders on that team, unfortunately, to play some lineups where they're at least decent defensively and where they have some sort of continuity and they can keep their guys healthy throughout the season. That this team can absolutely be, and this is the key word, an incredibly potent, balanced team offensively. They have like 6 or 7 guys who are absolute assassins. Joe Harris was excellent last night. Curry is a great player. Does a lot of different things, runs the pick and roll well, smart player. Durant is having an MVP caliber season, even though he's not shooting the three-pointer that well, which is amazing. Kyrie obviously needs no introduction, an amazing offensive player and a tremendous finisher at the rim, great distributor. You know, that TJ Warren came back after 2 years and actually looked pretty good. That team is incredibly scary. Incredibly scary.
Last couple,
I don't agree that you need to trade Kyrie. Certainly not at this point. You need to get him off the team. Like, yes, absolutely. He is the greatest disruptor in sports outside of some NFL wide receivers. But it is unbelievable what he's able to do on the floor. And their offensive ceiling is correspondingly unbelievable.
10, 14 days. And they're doing okay. He hasn't had any blow-ups. He's been seemingly contrite. You got to get him out. Don't sell high.
Get him out.
It's like you're not even selling high, but just you got to move now. Get him out.
All right.
And, if they can look, if the Lakers can bite and they have to take Westbrook's back and get a future pick that they can get spin for somebody else, great. If they can maybe get down.
See, I don't agree with this. I don't agree that that's the best path forward for the Nets at all. I think at the end of the day, you need to give this team, which you've invested so much in, and you don't want to get sunk cost fallacy-ish. I understand that. But you have put so much into this team. You actually just do want to see them play together for 40, 50 games. When Ben comes back and we might never see Ben consistently on the court, but this offensive team, at least under, a coach who they respect a bit more, that's another conversation about how much they didn't respect Steve Nash and what an atrocity that was. I'm sure Steve is thrilled not to be coaching that team anymore. But it is unbelievable how little continuity they've had. You want to try to at least see what your roster has in it in terms of potential.
Dallas is pretty panicky. Dallas I have at number 12 here.
I agree.
Dallas just signed Kemba Walker. Kemba Walker hasn't had a meaningful basketball moment in 2.5 years. And they were interviewing. I love Kemba Walker, by the way. I feel bad about saying this, but they're interviewing him on the sideline during this Golden State Dallas game tonight. And he's talking, I'm going to bring some energy and I'm a good locker room guy and hopefully some scoring. And it's like, yeah, on paper, this all works. If you were to.
What a great game that was, by the way. That game between Dallas and Golden State the other night, Luka was absolutely phenomenal. And we'll get to Dallas in a second.
2018 Kemba Walker, we have no idea if your knees can hold up. They won't. You can't guard anybody anymore. Dallas already has issues with guys who can't guard anybody, and I don't see how this works. So I'm wondering if Dallas is the Kyrie team.
Okay, that's such a funny thing. I don't know whether Bill noticed this at the time. He literally just said Dallas has a big issue with guarding people. Kemba's not a great addition because his knees won't hold up and he can't guard anybody. And then he advocated for trading for Kyrie Irving. Kyrie is the human version of a turnstile on defense. It is unbelievable to think about him being on this team and adding anything to their defensive sort of schema. There's no chance in hell that he would make them better defensively. He can put in effort and do decently well, but at the end of the day, he is not. He's not good at switching. He's horrible closing out. We've seen that a lot this season. He was one of the major culprits in Brooklyn's awful defense to start the year. They've been better recently, but he really, really, really is not a good defender. Easily post-upable, gets blown by on the regular. That's not a guy who's going to help your defense. So,
because, I think they need to make a move. I don't think it's sustainable what they're doing. It was sustainable in 2007. When the league was way less deep. But as great as Luka is individually, you're just putting him with a bunch of role players, and it's not going to work. The league's too.
I think Bill is dead on here. This is really good analysis. I think he's absolutely on target with this particular piece on Dallas. And not only is it not going to go anywhere sustainable in terms of winning multiple playoff rounds, which is how I usually like to parse it, or measure it rather. The thing is, Luka also, despite him being much more svelte, he came in actually without having eaten a lot in Slovenia before the season. He came off Eurobasket looking spectacular. This is too much of a burden. He looked at the end of the Golden State game the other night. He was Hall of Fame worthy, but he's bending over, gasping for breath at the end of the game. And that's not him being out of shape. They're asking that dude to play like 42, 43 hard minutes where he has to defend. They're trying to get him in switches at the end of the floor. And he just has to create for them borderline every possession that he's on the floor, or else they lose. They lose. And that's so much of a burden over an 82-game season. That's why I don't think Luka's going to win the MVP, because it's just too much of a physical burden for him to keep up the efficiency that he's gotten thus far. You know, he just doesn't have enough help, doesn't have enough ball handling help. At least last year, they had Brunson, who could kind of take the burden off of him a little bit, give him some off the ball time, allow him different angles at which to attack the defense. This year, to Bill's point, he is just hardening it at the top of the floor and taking amazing step backs and et cetera, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable without help.
Good now. It's, you know, last year they were able to get into the Western Finals for a variety of reasons, right? We had Clippers injuries. We had Memphis. They were banged up. And then we had just a black swan event with whatever the fuck happened with Phoenix in that series. But
absolutely unbelievable. Luka, there are very few completely mental collapses where a team that's clearly better, which I'll die on that hill. Phoenix clearly better than Dallas last year. Devin Booker's taken another step this year. He looks amazing. They choked that series. And I don't know whether Chris Paul had COVID or whatever it was, but they choked that series as aggressively as one possibly could. And Luka, just that indelible image of Luka, like, it's amazing. It was amazing what he did to them, because he was so far into their heads, they couldn't get him out when they were sleeping. It's unbelievable.
I went under on them this year heading into the season. I think I made that one of my locks too. I don't think they have enough talent, and so much relies on Luka that, you know, he's getting mentioned in the MVP arguments because of his stats, and he should. But I wonder, like, do you feel like the guys around him are getting better? Maybe Josh Green.
Josh Green's amazing, by the way. Tremendous athlete. The problem is, again, Jason Kidd has done this just as a quick aside on the Mavericks specifically. Jason Kidd, I understand when you have an established pecking order as far as big men go and you bring in another guy, which they did in the offseason, there is the temptation to be like, actually, you have to earn your spot. You know, this is a situation where, you know, where we're going to do our best to ensure that guys like Maxi Kleber still get minutes, and guys like, who else is on that team who plays big? Powell. He'll still get minutes. But it's like, at the end of the day, it is crazy to look at the roster. Let's look at Dallas's roster for a second. Well, you got Christian Wood. Christian Wood might be your second best offensive player. Full stop. I would say that he probably is. You know, he shot the ball really effectively at the beginning of this season, despite coming off the bench. You know, at a certain point, and he's said he's actually been a good soldier. He's worked on his game. He's tried to fit into the team, et cetera, et cetera. But that guy's got to play, man. I would play a lot of Luka. I read a stat the other day that Luka lineups with Luka, Christian Wood, and Josh Green, those three on the floor as a triumvirate they have the best stats of any triumvirate in the league, full stop, which is unbelievable. I would, as Jason Kidd, be really tempted to play them all the time. You know, I don't know why he isn't, to be honest with you, but we'll see what happens over time. But he's got to start. He's got to play more. You know, he has obvious chemistry with Luka. He is one of the best big men matches with Luka that I've ever seen. Again, he can shoot it. It's just a situation where I think that Jason Kidd is throwing away a lot of obviously attainable efficiency. And I don't particularly know why, other than loyalty to veterans, but you got to play the guys who are best. You know, you just do. I don't really understand it. He's shooting 41% from 3 on 3.5. He's had a brilliant start to the year. And this is only in 26 minutes. This guy's got to play more, man. You at least got to test it out, what he can do at higher volume.
No, it's a weird vibe. I would be a hypocrite if I was so harsh on the Westbrook OKC teams and the Harden Houston teams. Like, this is not one guy having the ball all the time. This does not work. I cannot support this. As brilliant as Luka is, I can't support this style. I don't think it works.
Agree with him. If
you're trying to win a title, I don't see it. I think you need.
And Kobe said the same thing. Rest in peace. When he was asked, I think he was doing a dual interview with T-Mac one time, and he was asked, like, "Okay, like, well, what do you think of the James Harden Rockets?" And he's like, I'm on the record of that style does not win in the playoffs. A very intelligent guy, and he's dead right. It's just too easy for a well-coached defensive team to defend when they know what's coming. Even if the guy is one of the best one-on-one players in the history of the league, which James was, it's too easy and too predictable and too counterable by well-coached defensive teams that are well-equipped on the defensive end personnel-wise. And that's what we saw, right?
Need more. And that, the Kyrie thing, put him in Dallas in that Kemba spot, what they're envisioning for Kemba, and that becomes a little more fun. And maybe it's just, is it Dinwiddie and Powell's expiring for Kyrie? Is that too much?
Offensively, that would be very workable. Kyrie is a guy who can absolutely catch and shoot, and he can take pressure off Luka. Luka can certainly catch and shoot as well, but their offensive synergy, I think, would be fine. And Dinwiddie's actually been good, but the problem is he's an attacker. He's not a good facilitator for others, really. And he's not the type of guy who's going to take that much of a burden off Luka long term. And so they need someone who can do the same thing that Brunson did last year, at least give him some possessions off and make good decisions on a consistent basis.
I don't know, but maybe Dallas is the team that makes the play for him. And then Toronto, I have a number 11, 11-9. They just haven't been healthy. I want to see.
That's totally fair. Siakam, there were whispers all off season that Siakam, amongst the Toronto people in the media and whatever, that Siakam was going to be one of the guys who made that next leap and be like, okay, Pascal is going to be a guy who is a clear all-NBA type player, guy who's capable of carrying the team, doing all these different things, including rebounding, playing good defense, etc., while making as many spin moves as humanly possible. It really, really looked like that was going to happen at the beginning of the year, and it still absolutely can. He missed a bit of time, and he's come back looking strong. But the Raptors, and they also have gotten, while Pascal was out, they've gotten really good play, especially on the defensive end, and against Luka specifically. OG Anunoby has done a really nice job. He has stepped up and become the next potential second or third best player on a team that can win multiple playoff series. He needs to shoot well, but he absolutely can be a huge piece of their success. Koloko, as much as he's an excellent defender right away, he's not ready offensively yet. And even as a rim runner, he's still he's extraordinarily raw. So we'll see what happens there, but they've started him relatively sparingly, and we'll see what happens there long term. Actually, Bo Cruz has been really good. Hernan Gomez has given them some good minutes early in the season. So to Bill's point, they've been really injured. They need some continuity, and they're well coached as well, especially offensively. I think that they'll figure it out. Scotty Barnes hasn't been spectacular to begin the year, but I have as much faith in him as I do in almost any young player in the league. So I think they'll be okay.
Siakam was playing really well. He got hurt. Barnes was hurt for a tiny bit. Anunoby's been excellent this year, and
right.
Is in the running for, I would say, a possible first-team all-defense guy, definitely at least second team. But I just want to see all their guys together, and then we can figure out, all right, what do you need? In the Gary Trent contract, you have some picks. What do you need? What are you going to do? One last note on this tier, the let's wait a month tier. KD is having a holy shit season.
He is.
And I feel like I'm heading toward an existential...
Coming off like serious injuries too in the past 3-4 years. It is actually staggering what he's been able to accomplish and how much they rely on him too. He is their rim protector in a lot of lineups. Without Nick Claxton, he's often their rim protector. He means so much to that team, and he brings so much value. And he's been so efficient, even though he hasn't shot the three well. He has been, again, another level. It's been another level.
Crisis when we get toward the MVP ballot, because he is at least partly the reason this Brooklyn thing has been so bizarre and such a soap opera, right? He demanded to be traded. He asked for the coach and GM to be fired.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one that vouched for Kyrie.
Whether or not he meant it, I don't know. KD is a guy who, he's just an odd dude at the end of the day. He's a guy who has done tremendous things on the basketball court, and that's where he wants to be. And he's also a really smart businessman, to his great credit. He's made a lot of great investments, owns a lot of things that are very profitable, has his own media company, I believe. Just a really smart dude, but quirky and weird. You know, there's that tweet, I would love to drink Scarlett Johansson's bathwater. You know, this guy's a weird guy. He just, at the end of the day, wants to be himself, think what he wants to think, and he wants to play basketball. He wants to wake up, hit the gym, get some shots up, play basketball later that day, go to bed. It's just, at the end of the day, he wants to have the game be the center of his life, or at least one of the centers of his life, and have people praise him for it, which he thoroughly deserves, you know, and have it be uncomplicated. Unfortunately, it's been the opposite, which again, at the end of the day, as human beings, we have to be able to accept the realities that our choices have produced, right? Or at least I think we do. And he hitched his wagon, Kevin did. He hitched his wagon to Kyrie. Kyrie, it was not as if Kyrie's disruptiveness in team concept ways came out of nowhere. He was a known quantity. And so that, at the end of the day, KD has to accept the consequences of what he chose to do and who he chose to do it with on a team. So absolutely, it does suck that he hasn't been able to have that tranquility to ply his craft, which is really what he wants. But he's also at least partially responsible for
Kyrie and defended him and all that stuff. And he's also the leader of the team. And I think until Nash got fired, it felt like the team was rudderless and didn't have a leader. What he's done since Nash got fired, he's kind of made it his team. And, you know, he's 37-5, 30 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting 55%, 37% from three, 92% free throw. 7.8 free throw attempts, which you know I love. Get to the line 8 times, I'm happy. And he's playing 36.7 minutes a game, partly because it's...
At like 35 or 36 years old, 34 maybe.
I went through his basketball reference because I was like, I think this is his second best season I've ever seen from him. And that was confirmed. At least
pretty good.
The 2014 was his, that was
his
opus.
That was his coup de grace, yeah.
That run he had in 2019 before he hurt his Achilles for the Warriors, his kind of contract year run, was probably the best he's ever played.
Completely unstoppable offensively.
But this is something.
It is.
And it's his 16th season, which is amazing. You throw in like not only Kyrie drama, but Ben Simmons. What the fuck are you getting from that guy game to game? Joe Harris, he has been healthy. Seth Curry started out hurt.
And the problem is, right, with Ben, is that at the end of the day, Ben's greatest ability, especially on that team where they do not have good perimeter defenders, like they're playing, Steve Nash was playing sometimes lineups that had Kyrie Irving and Patty Mills on the floor. It's just like, okay, I would like you to score 7 points a minute against us, please. We're giving up 3. It felt like every single possession was an absolutely premium shot for the other team, no matter what. And so, Ben is needed to provide at least some defensive intensity. Now, I think you have to cut Ben some slack physically because at the end of the day, he's a human being, although young, who just hasn't played much basketball. His back injury is certainly real. He has very real pain that he had to deal with for a long time and probably still does. And so he's going to take a while to get back into physical shape where he can be the defender that he once was. But the Nets need that from him. And he hasn't been able to provide it thus far, fouling way too much overall.
Getting healthy, still doesn't seem like...
Although he has improved. Certainly he's been more efficient offensively, taken more shots and made them a lot of the time before he got injured most recently. So
Seth from last year. So the fact that KD's been able to hold this together, they're 11-11, and it's not that hard to get the 4 seed in the East. It's going to be Boston, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and that 4 seed is going to be sitting there for somebody. So Brooklyn's...
I would actually bet on the Raptors if they're healthy, but health is a big concern for them.
They're hanging around, and they're hanging around because of him. So when we get to...
And the thing is also, and I don't think that this means nothing. The Nets are already 3-0 against the Raptors this year. Now, those games were not all Pascal Siakam games, but that is wreck. Like most of those games were not competitive. Like the Nets absolutely whooped them for most of the game last night. Toronto had a rough game offensively, and that's always been the question with this particular Toronto core. They play positionless, but if you play positionless, you do need to shoot the ball well, right? That's one of the advantages, the spacing the floor well. You have to shoot the ball well. And they haven't in a lot of important games, and they did not in that. Really, it disallowed them, in addition to Joel being really good in that series, and James Harden, to his credit as well. James Harden had some nice games against Toronto last year in the first round, but Toronto just didn't shoot the ball well enough to compete and be competitive in enough games in that series. And they need to prove that they can do that before they're a real threat to even win one round.
MVP ballot time, which I hate to break it to the people who keep doing MVP rankings, but we're only 20 games in. It's pretty hard to do that.
It is.
I'm talking to you, Zach Lowe. By the way, Zach's my friend. I gave him shit for this. It's going to be hard for me to not put him in the top 5, even though he's one of the reasons this team is so dysfunctional. I got to figure it out. All right, we're into the top 10. I have the semi-wild cards. The Clippers, number 10, 12-9. Philly, number 9, they're 12-9. I don't have a lot to say about either of these teams.
So he could just have titled these the injury risk teams.
I will say this.
The Doc Rivers category.
On a scale of 1 to 10, writing off Kawhi ever being a superstar.
Oh, like 9.2.
A meaningful star.
I'm out.
I'm at an 8.
Oh, 8 is low.
I've pretty much given up. And the reason I mention this is because I have Clipper season tickets. I've had them since 2004.
And it's genuinely a tragedy because Kawhi is a guy who is just, if you look at his playoff stats, his efficiency amongst really good players and compared to excellent playoff performers throughout their careers and et cetera, his efficiency is off the charts, and an obviously brilliant one-on-one defender. He is, he has just degenerative conditions in his joints and with his ligaments. It's just not a situation that is tenable from a health perspective over a long period of time. And it's nice that he got that championship with the Raptors, because despite his efficiency and his greatness when healthy, there's no doubt I would use the word greatness, he just cannot stay healthy. Just can't do it.
They've been fun the last 10 years, a couple of the seasons. 2012, 13, 14, they were a real contender. And 15. Blake Griffin, Lob City, that was fun. There was a lot of promise here with the Kawhi Paul George thing. I enjoyed the year before they got Kawhi, 2018. That was a fun, or 2019, that was a fun Clipper year.
It was.
It doesn't look like this team is ever going to make it to the finals. And
Agreed.
It doesn't look like that way because it doesn't seem realistic that Kawhi is going to be good anymore in the way that he was. He's 32. He was in the 2011 draft. Doesn't seem like the wear and tear of, you're talking 10 weeks in the playoffs. Then you get, like Haralbab was talking last week on this podcast about that conference final stretch where it's basically you're playing every other night for game 3 through game 7. What would possibly make you think he's going to be able to handle that? And without him, they're just not good enough. And we thought that was the best team in the league. Now it's clearly Jalen and Tatum. They're the younger, more durable version of whatever our ideal of Kawhi and George was. So I'm an 8 for him. And then on the scale of 1 to 10 of trusting an Embiid hardened health nucleus with Doc Rivers coaching.
Oh, 0 out of 10.
I'm sorry. I'm still an 8.5. I'm an 8.5 not trusting it.
Oh, okay.
You could even talk me into being a 9.
Oh,
so
9.8.
I'm mad at myself. I bet on them. I bet on their over, which was 50.
That's
because
stupid.
I thought they'd be a good regular season game.
That's stupid. And Harden was, to his great credit, when he was in Houston, one of the most durable players, just incredibly durable despite the number of fouls he drew. Still unbelievable how much punishment he took and how much his body physically, in terms of the burden on a night-to-night basis, how much he took and how durable he was. But he seems to me, and again, this is never definitive, but he seems to have turned a corner health-wise in a negative way, where he had that severe hamstring injury that he had to rehab from the entirety of last year, after injuring himself the year prior in that series against I believe he had injured himself against the Celtics, Maybe, and actually, no, that's not true. He played against the Celtics in the first round. They swept them, or they destroyed them at least. And then he got injured in the second round, I think, if I recall correctly. But either way, since he injured his hamstring, he just has not been healthy, and for any extended stretch.
Of course, Harden's already been hurt for a month.
And Joel, every time I watch Joel, as amazing as he is as a player, love his game. He just hits the floor 17 times a game. It's just like, Joel, you are a huge dude. You can't hit the floor this much. You're just going to get injured. It's the reality. Anthony Davis has the same problem. These dudes are just hitting the floor at odd angles and just with their bones sticking out. It's like, bro, you're going to get injured. That's just how it is. It's horrible to watch.
Who knows what them be? Anyway, we'll move on. Next category. Only 8 teams left. The sleepers.
Ooh.
I have number 8, New Orleans, 12-8, and number 7, Cleveland, 13-8. New Orleans is the team to watch. They just need to be healthy for a month.
Yeah.
What's crazy, I don't feel like we've seen all their dudes together, and they're still top 10 in offensive and defensive rating. They still have a shitload of
Zion's missed some games.
And most important, they have trades. That's another team that could just go get Caruso if they wanted to. Cleveland, same thing where.
And just a quick point on New Orleans. New Orleans, I completely agree with him. I was asked earlier, like a stream a couple weeks ago, someone asked, who are the dark horses that people aren't talking about enough? And the 3 that I mentioned, one of them is easy, but I just felt that at the beginning of the season, Milwaukee was not being respected nearly enough. Milwaukee is a team that, again, I'll tell you this, I give great credit to the Celtics last year for their run. They played brilliantly. They've been brilliant again this year. And you can only beat in the playoffs who's in front of you. The Warriors proved that last year. They had Jaws injury. The Nuggets team obviously had injuries, etc. But at the end of the day, the team that the Warriors didn't want to see in the finals, I promise you, and the team that the Celtics certainly didn't want to see, despite them going to Game 7, was neither of those guys wanted to see a healthy Milwaukee team. Healthy Milwaukee team with Chris Middleton. I mean, I can't imagine he just didn't play in the series against the Celtics. I just can't imagine them losing that series to the Celtics. As great as the Celtics were, that Milwaukee team, Giannis proved for the first time ever that he's human. He actually got tired in the second half of Game 7. But that dude single-handedly, with some help from not single-handedly, but with a huge Herculean effort, dragged them. They were up 3-2 in the series. They almost beat the Celtics, Milwaukee did, without Middleton, who is, in my opinion, their most consistent offensive player and just a dead-eye shooter, a guy who I think is incredibly underrated. One of my favorite players to watch in the league, incredibly intelligent. That's another winning player. So many winning players on that team. Holiday, same thing, just so smart, great distributor. That team, no one wants to see that team. No one wants to see that team this year. They've cruised to a great record early on. That is the top tier in not only the East and the NBA, in my opinion. Those are the 2 teams whose cores have been together, who have won multiple playoff series in multiple years, and who can just count on each other as winners. And who have coaches, even though Mazzulla's unproven, he's done a great job thus far this year, especially with the offense. And that continuity that they have, I think, makes them incredibly threatening to any team.
Garland starts the season, he gets hurt. Allen's hurt now. It just feels like they had a huge West Coast trip right in the start when they were playing well, and it just seems like, can we get 3 weeks from them where they're just home and happy and healthy?
Seriously.
Zion and Mobley are the wild cards. Zion, there's no matchup for him in the West.
Or really anywhere. There's just no one who can physically handle that guy over a 7-game series, for sure. And the thing that, what's interesting, this is a final point to cap New Orleans. What's amazing, and the other 2, by the way, dark horses that I chose were New Orleans, and which I'll discuss in a second, and Denver. I still think Denver is an absolute sleeping giant. I don't think they're going to be a great regular season team this year because they're still going to be getting their legs back for the next 20, 30 games. Porter's still not in the lineup every game. They're going to need some time, in my opinion. And they also need to improve their defense, get their legs back under them in that regard, even though KCP helps. But New Orleans specifically, that is a team that I think in the Western Conference is the most difficult matchup for the most teams because they're incredibly long. No one can guard Zion. He's a foul drawing machine, incredible rebounder. They can guard different positions. They have Alvarado, who's an absolute pest. The Golden State, for instance, a great playoff team. They would not want to see New Orleans. New Orleans is a team that can guard them on the perimeter, tremendous length. They're very switchable. That is not a fun matchup for anyone, including Golden State. So that's dangerous.
He's going to overpower every single team in the league if he's feeling it.
Absolutely.
They will slowly figure out how to unleash him. He seems like he's getting more and more comfortable offensively. And then the Mobley piece, like there's some interesting, we don't have enough data yet, but there's some interesting, John Schumann had it in his Monday column. There's some interesting Mobley as the only big on the floor.
He reminds me, by the way, of a young KG. He is, and that's probably too much pressure, but I have never seen a young player remotely resemble young KG. And Mobley, with his malleability, his athleticism, his defensive acumen and ability, his natural ability to switch and guard the pick and roll and et cetera, et cetera. I just haven't seen that toolbox ever in my time watching basketball outside of young KG. And that guy, that Mobley is special. Absolutely special. If they don't win a championship in that Cleveland team in the next 3 or 4 years, barring severe injury, something went fucking wrong there.
Stats with the Cavs, meaning no Love, no Jared Allen, just like Mobley basically as like the KG big, where it's pretty much the best lineup they have. I still like him and Allen together the most, but
and it's again to Bill's point, he's correct here. Their ability to match up and create different matchups with Love off the bench, with more guards who can score. They're a really malleable team. They can take many different shapes depending on the defensive matchup that's presented to them. And if they get to the playoffs with a good seed, that can be a really difficult out if they're healthy. Really difficult out in a similar way to New Orleans. He's right.
The ability for them to potentially go small ball with him, I think I would like to see them tap into. Anyway, New Orleans is 13-1 in the West. Cleveland is plus 750 to win the East. I think those are pretty good values.
I don't like Cleveland just specifically because their road is that much more difficult unless the top two teams get injured. Like them beating the Celtics in a series would be a monumental achievement on the road, you know?
Next category, we're down to the bottom 6. The contenders, I have 4 teams here. Memphis 12-8, Golden State 11-11, Denver 13-7, Phoenix 14-6 as the number 3. So Memphis, I think, has the highest ceiling, right? Bane makes another leap. He gets hurt right as Jackson's coming back. So we haven't seen Bane, Jackson, and Morant all together. And once we see that, I think the ceiling of them from a talent, youth, defense, grit, grind standpoint, like the home court advantage, I still think Denver's
not a grit and grind team anymore. But to his point, that team is another team that can really play different lineups. They have Steven Adams, they have Triple J. These guys are really dangerous matchups because Jaw can obviously attack anyone. They can go really aggressive pick and roll with Steven Adams screening, and their ability to shoot the ball on a consistent basis. Desmond Bane, one of the best. I think he went 30th, and then Memphis acquired him from the Celtics. He is one of those guys who that's how you build a franchise, man. You find guys who are absolute all-star caliber. I would say he's a top 5 shooter in the NBA. Built like a fucking fire hydrant, but he is an amazing player. Short arms, but just so competitive. And just that team can score. Can score in many different ways. They can play in many different lineups. They can defend with aggression and consistency. And they're so dangerous to so many teams. But again, they have to stay healthy. And their issue, again, is free throw shooting. Jaw included, they need to be more consistent shooting free throws, or else that will absolutely bite them in an important playoff game at the end of the day. They were able to miracle that first round series against the Timberwolves last year, despite being vastly outplayed. But their free throw shooting, among other things, does make them vulnerable. So we'll see with them.
It's going to have the best record in the West. But I think Memphis would be if I had to bet on one of those 4 teams, I might lean toward Memphis because I think they also have a lot of assets they could move in a trade.
And speaking of assets, and again, I give Memphis a lot of credit for the team that they've built. That front office has done a really nice job with player evaluation. Desmond Bane, the point that I just brought up. However, one of the moves that I liked the least in the offseason by any team, they traded DeAnthony Melton And I just don't think they should have. That's another situation. I would be shocked if they didn't understand his value. But he's a really good player. He's a guy who, they get like the rights to a later round pick, or, I don't know if it was a pick swap or whatever it was, but it was something relatively inconsequential in last draft. And they got anyway, I forget who it was, but like they just situationally, it made no sense for a player of that value. If you nail, for instance, a draft pick at the 13 to 15 range, or even the 10 to 15 range, whatever, and it becomes the Anthony Melton, that's a really good pick. So to trade that away for, again, 50 cents on the dollar at most, in my opinion, I didn't get that at all. Now, I will give the Memphis front office some slack because they are better at their job than I'll ever be. They've done an amazing job recently overall, but I didn't like that at all. That really negatively impacted their depth. Now, I'm sure that they didn't want to pay him long term, but still, I would rather him on my team than Jones, I'll tell you that much. Even though I understand why they need a secondary ball handler.
Does too. Denver really does not, and Phoenix really does not. But I'm watching Memphis. I want to see them go on a run, and I feel like it's going to happen at some point. Denver has the best player.
They do.
Out of these 4 teams. Sorry, Steph Curry, earmuffs.
I mean, first of all, it's very interesting because Steph, it's just so difficult to criticize Steph because Steph specifically, number one, has been MVP caliber thus far this year. That Golden State team, even though Draymond has been excellent, Draymond really, really good, great leadership. And he, again, that punch is a video unto itself, but inexcusable, obviously, especially from the angle that Draymond is supposed to be bullying the other team, right? Draymond is supposed to be a guy who protects the younger players, who sets the example, who they can trust as a big brother type figure in the locker room and on their team. For him to sucker punch, which is what happened, a younger player is egregious, doesn't really cover it. It's just inexcusable. That said, he has been an exemplary leader, especially considering at the end of the first 20 games, let's say, Golden State was having severe problems with their second unit. They put Draymond on it. He slows it down, gives them greater offensive efficiency, obviously gives them greater defensive togetherness and continuity. He has been borderline all-star level. Again, I would say top 3 defensive player of the year candidate. He looks svelte. He's quick. The defense that he played at the rim last night against Chicago over and over was staggeringly good, and even made a huge 3-pointer late. The guy has been unbelievable. However you feel about him, he's been unbelievable this year on the court.
But Jokic is so dominant when he's on the floor, and then when he goes off the floor, it's a catastrophe.
And you could say the same thing about Steph. You could make the absolute same point about Steph. If Steph had been, let's say, just very good in the first 15 games for the Warriors, they may have started like 2-13. Just very good would have been not nearly good enough. That's how bad, especially the bench, because unfortunately they're playing Wiseman, Moody, and Kuminga wasn't very good early on, although he's been brilliant lately. And I hope to see more of that. He was amazing against Luka and Dallas the other night. Part of what made that game great. But their second unit was horrible, and they needed every ounce of borderline top 10 player of all time that they could get from Steph to survive.
It's a 30-point difference if you look at that 100 possessions, points per, whatever that stat is. I do think the Jokic three-peat is in play. People are talking about Tatum for MVP, Luka, Curry, Giannis, all the usual suspects, but just don't sleep on, we're going to wake up in like January and Denver's going to be like 27-11 or something, or, 29-9. And we're like, wait a second. Are we going to have this Jokic?
He thinks I viscerally disagree with that. I don't think we're going to wake up in the middle of January and Denver's going to be 29-9. I don't think that's true at all. I think the league is way deeper. To Bill's point, he's made this point already, way deeper than it's been in past years. There are many fewer easy wins outside of like San Antonio, and the Hornets without LaMelo. There just aren't that many easy wins. And I don't think Denver, again, they're going to be playing guys less. They're not going to be stretching guys like Murray and what's his name? Michael Porter Jr. They're not going to be stretching them that much. They're not going to be playing them back-to-backs, whatever. 29, and I think that's crazy. That's dead wrong.
Which conversation again? I will say this. He's the most fun player in the league to play with other than maybe Curry. And he really, really does make everybody else better.
Oh yeah, I mean, as stilted a thing as that is to say, it's absolutely dead on 1,000%. And you see that again. Monte Morris less efficient. Will Barton way less efficient, even though he's had a smaller role given. It's just playing with Nikola Jokic, especially as a shooter who can be on the perimeter. It is unbelievable the space and the facilitation that he creates. Crazy.
Like everybody benefits from him. So just had to mention that. Golden State has a pedigree. I'm not ruling them out. The big thing with them is Draymond looks like he's back last 6 games. He was
amazing,
awesome in that Minnesota game. Like just awesome. I think he had 11 assists, no turnovers, and just looked like Draymond again. So whatever happened.
And not just Draymond again. Draymond of like his absolute apex when he was, really playing defensive player of the year stuff in, game out. He looks like he lost 3 or 4 years off his age.
That punch, it feels like the hangover is done with them. And
we'll see. Jordan Poole, to be fair, had really struggled before the past few games. One of the least efficient offensive players in basketball before his last 4 or 5 games. So we'll see whether the hangover is completely dissipated for him.
Or at least as far as we can tell. But it looks like they have their mojo back. They still have a trade to make. They're going to do something.
For sure.
I think test driving DiVincenzo for the next month or so, but I'll be interested to see if that ends.
And again, I think as they tighten their rotation a bit, and certainly they'll do so for the playoffs, assuming they get there, if they're young dudes, and especially Kuminga, if Kuminga continues his ascension, which he started potentially in the last 2 or 3 games, and he's much more engaged on the defensive end as he was against Luka the other night, brilliant. He's going to play more and more, I think.
Ends up being their swing guy. I still am not. If Clay doesn't have it, I still don't know who their 5 is.
And I don't. Again, YouTube video on this is up, but I just think that narrative is so crazy. I just think it's so wrong. I think even saying that out loud before you give Clay like 82 games played at least, or 100 games played after he came back from those 2 injuries, I think even broaching that subject is the most reactionary shit ever.
Like if it's like they're down 3-2 in a series, they're in Memphis, and Clay's 2 for 12. Who's in that spot? It's Curry and Poole, some sort of swing, Draymond. I don't know. I can't figure it out yet with them. I can't figure out what their optionality is if Clay's not playing well.
Optionality.
And until they figure that out, I think they're going to still be struggling. Phoenix, it's weird. Booker's playing great. Chris Paul easing into a different phase of his career, I think it's fair to say. But
for
still,
sure. I mean, again, Phoenix may not have beaten New Orleans last year without Chris Paul going absolutely Super Saiyan mode. Unbelievable. I think he had a game where he shot perfectly in that series. I mean, they would not have won. Again, if he had been just good in that series, they may have not have won that series.
Wouldn't be
so he's still, that point being, he still has that extra gear when he's remotely healthy.
If he could.
Speaking of gears, Kim Kardashian knows all about that.
Put together 10 good playoff weeks. Ayton's been good. They have kind of the infrastructure, which is why they're 14-6, but they have a lot of question marks to me. What are they getting from Crowder? Do we trust CP? Do we trust Cameron Payne? I don't.
Not long term, but he's been brilliant. I love watching him play. He's been really good. Had a couple of really good games, one against the Warriors, where he was absolutely unbelievable. That was the game that prompted all of the Klay Thompson talk, where Klay's washed and et cetera, et cetera. Cameron Payne destroyed them in that game. He really did.
CP, way more like his ability to play in year 19 or whatever it is versus whatever they've been getting from Cameron Payne. I don't like their bench that much. They don't really have a lot to trade, and the Halliburton pick continues to haunt them. But
absolutely,
they know who they are, and Booker is great. And Booker, I think, has ascended. I had him in my trade value list. I think he was in the top 9, maybe. Yeah. So
but Booker looks like he's taking that absolute last step. He had, over 50 in 3 quarters the other night. He can score when that guy is, and he said after the game, it looked like it was a double, wide rim out there. And that's the case, The question is, how in the world with a player like that and a team with depth like that, and Cameron Johnson, another guy who I really like, he's going to play more when he gets back from injury. That team is so good. how in the world did they manage to blow that series against Dallas? That's one of the things that I would love to read the book about that, because there's got to be some, I'm obviously Ayton, there was some consternation, some friction. But he was brilliant in the playoffs before that series. Ayton was. And including a couple games in that series, Ayton was really, really good. He was showing different offensive dynamism, great moves, was rebounding well. They just absolutely full spine collapsed. And I don't understand it. It came out of nowhere for me. And there were signs there a little bit with how they struggled with New Orleans in the previous round. But New Orleans, as we've seen this year, is really spunky. That's a really spunky team. They're well coached. And I can't believe it. I still can't believe it.
He was not in the top 9 when I did over the summer. The favorites are Milwaukee at 14-5. Look, Giannis statistically is a little down. They haven't been able to have Middleton and Holiday out there together for a long stretch.
And that's the thing that I think is going to hold. There are two things that I think are going to hold back the Giannis train from winning an MVP this year. One is that he's won one already. He's won Defensive Players of the Year, whatever. He's still a tremendous defender, unbelievable, and a candidate for that award. But Giannis specifically, he's not shooting the free throws well. He's not shooting threes that well, even though he's never done that well. But he's back really being suspect at the line. We got Laddergate out of that reality where he tried to shoot free throws after the game and Montrezl Harrell started to fight in the arena. But I just don't think Milwaukee, again, they have tremendous confidence. They're not going to really push for the 1 seed. I don't think they're going to push their guys that hard. They have tremendous confidence in their continuity, their core, that core's ability to win multiple playoff rounds, even if they don't have the 1 seed. I don't think they're going to push Giannis that hard, and they're going to get him ready for the playoffs. And so I just don't think there's going to be as much urgency for him to play as many games, and I think that's going to cost him in the MVP race.
They might still be a wing short. This would be a great Caruso team, but it's still Milwaukee. It's still Giannis.
And I disagree with that. Certainly, obviously, like any team that has playoff aspirations, championship aspirations, can use Caruso, again, a winning player. But I don't think they're a wing short. Javon Carter was amazing when Middleton was out. He had some great games where they actually were playing almost nobody else. They were, again, that team really, really good. I actually don't think Grayson Allen's that bad a player. He can shoot it. He's had some moments. Bobby Portis has had playoff moments. I think their depth is totally fine. I have tremendous confidence in that team. Maybe too much, but a lot of confidence. Maybe more than any team in the league. The Celtics, obviously, I think they need Robert Williams to be at their apex, and we'll see when he comes back.
I see them, and they're still going to win somewhere between 55 and 60 games. So I'm not going to overreact to any piece of it. I am going to overreact to the Celtics. 17-4. I have them as number 1. Some Celtics stats for you. They're 45-11 in their last 56 regular season games. They have a 12.5 point differential this season. The franchise record,
amazing,
as Sean Grandy points out, was 10.3 in 2008. So they're better than the 2008 and 1986 team for point differential right now. Their points per 100 possessions, 121.5. The record in the history of the NBA,
it's lower than that for sure,
is 117.3 by the 2021 Nets. So
unbelievable, bro.
And if you watch them, it kind of makes sense. It's what Harrell.
Yeah, said. Offensively, they absolutely pass, and he's going to, I'm sure, overreact to his team, but they are unbelievable offensively, and Joe Mazzulla deserves a great amount of credit. He's just leaned into the core, obviously, the ball movement, the playing as many shooters at once as possible and moving them in and out as needed. He has a good feel for the game. I think Mazzulla does. He's had a really, really good tenure thus far, and I did not know whether or not he was going to have that. So good for him.
Last week when we were doing the pod, these teams that have 5 guys who can shoot is kind of like staring into the future of wherever the league is going.
For sure.
It's been 10 years now since the Curry influence started, right? 2012-13, that was the first Curry season where it's like, what's this? Wait a second, what's happening? This guy's going to shoot from there? And we've had 10 years of it, and the sport has changed in front of our eyes. And you're looking at a whole new generation of guys, 24 and under, who are coming in who just play the Curry style. They play that wide open 3-point slash and kick. They know how to do it. So you have this whole new young working class coming in that can shoot from any spot, that know where to go, that can play, and just the sport's changing, and the Celtics like personify it. Like every guy in the team can shoot. It's unbelievable. Robert Williams is out right now. Even Cornette, who's the backup center right now, even he could make a three from time to time. They have 5 of the 19 players in the league who have taken at least 33s and are making 45% of them. 5 of the 19. They have Sam Hauser, who Chris Mannix just wrote about this week, who's been, an unbelievable story. It makes me mad that they didn't throw him out there in the finals last year. But he's turned into like the Max Strus, Duncan Robinson type that you've been, if you're a Celtic fan, you've been wondering for 30 years why we can't get one of those guys. They Pritchard, who doesn't even play. And Pritchard, they'll just throw out and he'll have an awesome 15 minutes. You're like, I can't believe this guy can't be in an NBA rotation. I feel like he'd play 35 minutes a game for the Lakers. He's barely playing for the Celtics. And then you have Tatum and Brown, the best duo in the league, 56.9 points a game, which is, we're nearing like Shaq Kobe territory with that.
Whoa.
Shaq Kobe territory.
Okay. I know he's overreacting to his own team, but that is really pushing it. Those are 2 of the top 15 minimum players of all time. Maybe top 20, maybe I'd say top 15. Shaq is the most dominant individual player I've ever seen play with my own eyes. Given the context, that's just not legitimate. Again, they have had unbelievable years. And again, he's measuring it by points combined. Like the league has changed significantly since Shaq and Kobe played in terms of the amount of scoring overall, the offensive efficiency, the way the game is played, etc. But, I mean, that's crazy. There's just no way that you can make that case. However, they've been brilliant. The last litmus test for me, there are 2 for the Celtics, in terms of me declaring them the absolute championship favorite alongside Milwaukee, is 2 things. One, I want to see Robert Williams come back and be healthy. That's the thing. I want to see him have his explosiveness back, have him play the corner and be able to rotate off the short corner to block shots in the same way as a secondary defender that he did last year, which was a brilliant innovation, by the way. And I just want to see that be a thing so I can be confident in their defense in the way that I'm confident about their offense. And Bill is rightfully so. The second thing is Jaylen Brown, as much as I think he's a very good player, had a lot of things go wrong last year in the playoffs where he's just dribbling and he throws the ball to the other team. The Celtics, despite their absolute brilliance throughout the latter half of the regular season and most of the playoffs last year, they would have these brain farts where they would actually just turn the ball over in a way that would make a high school coach go like, oh, wow, that's really upsetting. They would straight up throw the ball to the other team. And Jaylen Brown would be dribbling around, and him dribbling the ball in tight windows, tight spaces, he would turn it over a lot. He would kind of fuck up a bit. I want to see against good defensive teams that are going to force the Celtics to play through pressure like that. I want to see that team respond with efficiency and calmness, especially Jaylen Brown. I'm confident, very confident in Tatum. I still think one of Tatum and Curry is going to win the MVP. Tatum being my front runner, someone who I would say at the beginning of the season was my favorite. I didn't see Curry coming, to be honest. I'm not going to lie to you guys. But yeah, no, there is not, saying that they're vintage Shaq and Kobe, again, totally relax. Definitely relax about that one. Vintage Shaq and Kobe were the core of a team that lost 1 game to Allen Iverson at the start of the finals. I think they went 15-1 in the playoffs because they didn't play 4 games every round then. It's like that was I think that was 2001. That was an absolute tour de force run. Like, let's really definitely pump the brakes in comparing those guys to vintage Shaq and Kobe, please.
Is the 56.9 range. I'm just telling you, go look it up.
Okay, it's a different league, brother. Come on.
They're shooting 49%.
And don't get me wrong, they have been brilliant. Unmitigated brilliance. And Tatum especially, on both of them, on both ends of the floor. Tatum is probably the best two-way player in the game. He's an absolutely brilliant player. A guy who any team would love to have as a centerpiece of their core. But vintage and Shaq and Kobe, like, relax your tits,
5% of their threes, that it feels like that could actually go up a little. 85% free throws, 13.5 free throws a game.
Unbelievable.
All the advanced stats are ridiculous. And Tatum, as we talked about in this pod previously, like, he's just answered any question you had from him from the finals last year. He plays his fucking ass off. He gives a shit. He's going to be either a first team or second team all defense, and he should be because he's a ridiculous two-way player now. he's fixed all of the getting to the basket, bouncing off guys, finishing little 12-footers, all the stuff that Golden State exposed, he's fixed.
Totally. And we'll see again in the playoffs, very different environment. But to his credit, Tatum played through a wrist injury last playoffs, and he also was a bit gassed at the end. And Andrew Wiggins, his tremendous defense was a huge part of that. But at the end of the day, this was a situation where Tatum did seem like he ran out of gas a bit in the finals, and you can't really blame him. This is the first really, like, he's never been to the finals before. Tremendously long playoff run where they relied on him on both ends a lot. Had to defend KD in the first round, even though that series was only 4 games. A lot of stress, you know? So him running out of gas was not unexpected. We'll see how he does this year.
And I think he's been the best two-way player in the league. And if the Celtics are going to be a 60-win team or a 65-win team potentially, he has to be the MVP. Because
I completely agree. Despite Brown being excellent, I completely agree.
He's the key to all of it. The way they're playing with all these shooters, it reminds me a little of in Madden or even in the real NFL when you just have 5 receivers, no running back, and you're just like flinging it. And the defense at some point has to decide, all right, what do we do? That's what they're doing that after night. They're having these games. Like they played Charlotte. They had 45 points in the first quarter. It felt like they were going to get 50.
With Charlotte, but still.
Watching, you're like, are they going to get 180 points today?
Crazy.
Just incredible firepower. It's up there for me with the 86 Celtics as the best offensive team we've had since I've been following the team. And, you know, the big thing was Joe Mazzulla. He's coming in. It's like, this is a disaster. This guy wasn't even one of the lead assistant last season. We lose Ime, who was a huge part of the success. How's this going to work? Guy's been great. He's already got little coaching quirks. Like he won't call timeouts sometimes. He wants them to play through it.
That's the Phil Jackson. That's something that Phil Jackson really started doing. It was a very unorthodox practice when Phil started doing it. He wanted in the regular, now certainly he didn't do that much in the playoffs, but in the regular season, he often allowed his teams to play through difficult stretches so they would know how to get out of it. It's like that line in the West Wing where a guy falls down a hole and his friend walks by and the guy's a priest and he's like, hey, can you help me out? I'm down here in the hole. The priest writes a prayer and throws it down. And then another guy walks by, he's an architect, and he's like, hey, can you help me out? I fell down the hole. The architect writes plans for a ladder and then throws them down. And then another friend walked by, just a common guy. Like, hey, the guy in the hole is like, hey, I fell down. Can you help me out? The friend jumps in. And the guy's like, now we're both in the hole. Why'd you do that? And the friend goes, well, I've been down here before. I know how to get out. And that's the kind of principle that Phil Jackson wanted his teams to have. He wanted them to have been down in the hole before and know how to extricate themselves from whatever difficult situation they found themselves in game-wise.
His subs are really smart where, like Friday night, they were playing Sacramento and Sacramento's lingering around and they bring in Pritchard and they bring in Cornette at the perfect time. And Pritchard's awesome. He ends up being plus 29 in 11 minutes. And it was just, he just has a sense for, maybe I'll bring this guy in. Well, I love what they're doing with Blake Griffin. My dad was talking this about me today, where with Blake Griffin, they basically told him, like, you're not going to play garbage time, and we're not going to throw you out there, just throw you out there. When you play, you're actually going to play. So Blake Griffin has now turned into this once-a-week player for them, which they haven't had a lot of back-to-backs yet, but they had one yesterday in that Charlotte game, and it's like, all right, Blake, today's your day. So Blake's now turning into like this 40-year-old guy at the Y who's like, every Tuesday I get a run in with the Celtics, and he played well, and that's maybe the way to use it. Maybe he plays.
Certainly anything they can get out of Blake, considering how washed he looked last year, anything they can get out of him is a coaching masterpiece because he looked completely done on the Nets last year.
38 games, but when he plays the 38 games, he's playing like 19, 20 minutes a game. Teammates love him, and it's a good spot for him. It's the best team he's ever been on. So I think the Celtics are the clear number one right now. I have them leading the power poll. We will see if that continues. I'll do this again at the 40-game mark.
Very nice. Very well done overall. We obviously had some disagreements, and I think he put some teams in some spaces. Let's look at the tiers real quick. So this, again, totally, but these are obviously legitimate. This legitimate, unfortunately, especially with Cade's injury. One interesting thing about Detroit, which I forgot to mention, we have seen some really important Killian Hayes minutes. The least consistent not even the least efficient offensive player in the league the last couple of years overall. He has actually had some nice moments starting for Detroit. And if they're able to get some positives from him, that would really reward them. And that's a big thing because he was basically at zero in terms of his value to start this year. So that would be huge for Detroit. I think Oklahoma City, again, the Shea question is everything for me. I don't know when he loses his shit. I would not tank if I was Chicago. The Knicks, again, the question with RJ, they just have to fix that in terms of their offensive ceiling and RJ limiting it too much. So, yeah, the rest of them are pretty accurate. I think there's a pretty reasonable overall distribution. We'll see where Minnesota goes in the next couple of weeks without Carl, see if they're going to make any improvements. I think Atlanta's a bit too low, but again, they need to show some consistency. They need to show whether or not they're going to be a consistent team that can figure out what they have. Like, I wouldn't panic if I was them for sure. I think that's wrong. And then this is totally fair. I would have Brooklyn actually in this tier right now. So we'll see. We'll definitely see. And then these are very accurately placed. This is clearly correct. This is very legitimate. No, it's legit. It's pretty accurate. I think Bill did a great job, and we'll see him halfway through the season, probably closer to the All-Star break. And just as a capper, I wanted to discuss LeBron because LeBron is a very socially aware, socially observant guy, a very smart individual. I haven't always agreed with him. I certainly viscerally disagreed with him when he was talking about Daryl Morey's tweets about human rights in Asia. But I understand completely what he was asking the other day when he asked this. Let's see, LeBron.
I was wondering why I haven't gotten a question from you guys about the Jerry Jones photo. But when the Kyrie thing was going on, you guys were quick to ask us questions about that.
Okay.
Hold on. And I don't even want you guys to say nothing. When I watched Kyrie talk and he says, I know who I am, but I want to keep the same energy when we're talking about my people and the things that we've been through. And that Jerry Jones photo is one of those moments that our people, black people, have been through in America. And I feel like as a black man, as a black athlete, as someone with power and a platform, when we do something wrong or something that people don't agree with, it's on every single tabloid, every single news coverage. It's on the bottom ticker. It's asked about every single day. But it seems like to me that the whole Jerry Jones situation photo, and I know it was years and years ago and we all make mistakes, I get it. But it seemed like it's just been buried under like, oh, it happened. Okay, we just move on. And I was just kind of disappointed that I haven't received that question from you guys.
Okay, so there are two parts of this. And it's a really interesting issue because I think I completely, on the one hand, understand where LeBron is coming from because what he says is at least partially correct. When he makes the statement that Jerry Jones and the coverage of that photo was very much a sweep under the rug thing compared to what Kyrie went through, he is absolutely correct. That is, again, two things that are really important here. One, what Kyrie did was much more recent, obviously, so it's much more relevant. And the reason LeBron specifically wasn't asked, and there isn't an onus incumbent upon the journalists who cover LeBron to ask about Jerry Jones, whereas there is with Kyrie, was the following. What percentage of LeBron's life has he spent with Jerry Jones? 0.00000000001 maybe percent. I don't know whether he's had a meeting with him one time. Kyrie, by comparison, a very good percentage. He spent probably years of his life. He spent a couple of years in Cleveland, the same locker room, traveling with him, whatever. LeBron, a very smart, socially aware, socially observant guy of other people, including, basketball stuff, but human beings as well. LeBron very good source, live source of information and observation on the human being at the center of the controversy there, Kyrie. So you have to, as a journalist, I feel, ask him about the human being who he knows, or at least who he used to know. So vastly different in terms of LeBron getting questions about Kyrie versus Jerry Jones. Completely different situation in terms of sourcing, right? However, LeBron, again, is dead correct. And I think his core point is there weren't many athletes in the NFL, contemporaries of Jerry Jones, other owners, his GMs, whatever, asked about this in the same way that everybody in the NBA, especially LeBron and other people who have played with Kyrie, were asked about the Kyrie situation. That's unfair. It is unfair, and it's wrong. They should not have buried that. I don't know whether they completely buried it, but certainly compared to Kyrie, LeBron is dead right. They buried that in terms of story comparison, no doubt about it. So he has a right, absolutely, regardless, he has a right to ask this question, even if he was wrong. And he's not. He's in my opinion, wrong about whether or not he should be asked about Jerry Jones compared to Kyrie. But he's not wrong in that the media should have been much more aggressive, asking questions of people in the NFL about this story. Full stop. So, and I'm sure that he's disappointed. He has a right to be. It's very fair. Because you want, and again, unfortunately, the overriding reality is if you compare the two leagues in terms of the NBA versus the NFL, in terms of their social conscience, what they're trying to do to be a more morally upstanding and conscientious league. The NBA is light years ahead. You know, all you have to do is look at the Deshaun Watson thing, how it played out last offseason. And the fact that there's an owner willing to give the most guaranteed money of all time to a guy facing a litany of sexual assault civil lawsuits, you know? And fairly clear, again, as a lawyer, based on the evidence that these things happened, right? I find these, and so did the legal people in the process, the disciplinary process for the NFL. They found at least a few of the witnesses, I think it was 4 or 5 of them, who testified in front of the NFL disciplinary officer, Sue L. Robinson, and she's like, they were universally credible. And still, this guy, the owner of the Cleveland Browns, gives him the most money of all time guaranteed in that contract and defends him. And then you got Deshaun coming out after he agrees to settle the cases, being like, I stand on my innocence. I did nothing wrong. It's like, okay, well, that's the NFL for you, ladies and gentlemen. And perhaps it's unfortunate and unfair maybe to paint with so broad a brush, but the contrast between the two leagues is absolutely staggering in terms of moral adherence to fair public standards, I would say. So, but LeBron has an absolute right to ask. I think that he's wrong specifically on the question of whether he should be asked about that compared to Kyrie, just as an individual. But I completely understand where he's coming from in terms of demanding equal coverage on both of those are important issues, very important issues, you know? The fact that it was buried by comparison, which it was thus far, is not acceptable or shouldn't be acceptable. So just in a time of very difficult moral questions and Kanye West going absolutely off the deep end in a sea of very unfortunate, very public, manic episodes, it appears. It's just really sad, you know, and we have to do a lot better as a sports community, as a commentary community in general. So hopefully we can do that in the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. Cheers.